Hello, and welcome to Humans of Magic, the show that gets up close and personal with your favorite Magic the Gathering personalities. I'm your host, James Su. You are listening to my conversation with Alexander Hayne. Alexander Hayne is from Canada. He's the Pro Tour Avacyn Restored champion and is generally a high-level Magic player. Alexander has also, in recent years, been very public about his struggles with mental health and has actually written about this topic. I had really wanted to talk to him for a long time. We're talking about high-level Magic, the mindset, what it was like to win a Pro Tour. Actually, not all the great stuff that came out of that in terms of the after effects. There are some really instructive life lessons in this, and Alex is definitely not shy about sharing them with us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Today on Humans of Magic, I'm here with Canadian legend Alexander Hayne, aka Alex Hayne, aka Insane Hayne. What are your other nicknames? Do you have any new monikers you've created for yourself?
I created for myself? Not really. No, I mean sometimes I guess in the community I've been known as Hayne, or I know at some point I think some people started calling fans of mine Hayniacs or something. Or
Wow, that is I guess it's kind of like you can't really give yourself a nickname. Like other people have to give you a nickname, otherwise it's
exactly.
not real, right? Like you can't just claim like I'm gonna be Hayniac right now. Yeah, how are you doing, man? How are you doing, Alex?
All right, all right. The whole pandemic and stuff, I think, has been hard on everybody. And then also, have the additional challenges kind of figuring out what my next step is after the Pro Magic thing is kind of, I don't know, collapsed, or if it's over, whatever you want to say. And I have my own, mental health struggle and stuff, but mostly pretty good. Not perfect, but I guess you can never be perfect. When people on the street ask you how you are, you always just say, "Oh, I'm good, thanks. How are you?" But I think we try to go a little deeper than in this podcast, so I didn't give you my automatic response.
I'm just laughing because I realized I committed the cardinal sin. Like I had an episode with Jerry Thompson recently, and I said, "How are you?" and he said, "Bad," and then we ended up talking about that for like half an hour. And I should have just used his advice today, which is like, I shouldn't have said, "Alex, how are you?" I should have said, "Alex, it's good to see you," and just don't leave the door open to have a question. Because I asked Jerry, like, how are you doing? He said, honestly, I'm doing really bad. And we just talked about that for half an hour. But Alex, it's good to see you, man. I mean, I really mean it. I think I have seen your Magic boomerism in full display over the years, and basically saying how you're, just passing judgment on players, left and right. And I love that stuff. So it's not a dig. I just really like the way you communicate yourself in Magic, or just yourself. Like it's just not apologetic, because I think I want to say a lot of people these days, like they're just kind of like always tippy toeing and just like, oh, am I gonna upset this person if I say this, or and I feel like honestly speaking, I feel like the PT Magic players, or like the old school Magic players, or whatever you want to call your group, or maybe you don't think of yourselves as a group, but it's just like, you just don't give a fuck. Like just say it how it is, right? It's like I see you and Spurley and these people just on Twitter, just calling it how it is,
But yeah, it's interesting. First of all, I somewhat appreciate that. But there's a lot to digest in there. For instance, I don't know if I would consider myself an old school Magic player, and certainly until recently, the Magic divide of boomer versus zoomer happened. I certainly wouldn't have called myself a boomer, right? In terms of the actual generations, my parents are, young end of baby boomers, right? I'm a proud millennial, fighting against all those articles that claim that it's my generation's fault that restaurants that are crap are closing and so on. But the latest thing is like, if you're before the arena period, kind of, that you're a boomer now, right? Because when I came in, Magic and Pro Magic scene was very established already. So I kind of was, felt like a newcomer for a while. But at this point, I basically had a pro career for like 10 years. So I am part of the old guard now, which is you never kind of view yourself that way. You have to see it from the outside. So
I think that's a fair. I think it's a fair comment. Like nobody in Magic is really a literal boomer. I guess. I guess it's just all relative because now you have these 11-year-olds playing Magic and and
yeah.
whatever it is, right? I'm sure there are folks in Canada who are like like crushing it on Magic Online and they're like 9 years old or whatever. The age gets lower every time I speak about it. And you're right. Like I understand you started your getting into Magic seriously. I think it was in college, you said, right? Or is like university.
Yeah, so it's CEGEP, which is the thing that basically is between high school and university here in Quebec. I was 17 basically when I was first getting into Magic, and it was like a friend of mine at school who really got me into it, bringing me to like a card shop. Before that, I'd seen the game, encountered a bit, but I hadn't really dived in. I was the point that my understanding the rules was from various people had told me. One guy told me that you could skip it on your turn, instead of drawing a card, you could shuffle your deck instead.
Nice. All right. They taught you how to cheat before you knew what cheating was. I love it.
Yeah, well, that rule only made sense if you're like, you think it's a classic like beginner thing of, I drew 3 lands in a row. My deck's probably not shuffled enough. I'll shuffle it more. Like,
right.
But obviously I quickly got into the real rules and start, I playing FNMs and stuff.
Yeah.
What turned out to be the most competitive store at the time in Montreal. And I played what then was the Magic Scholarship Series, which was basically the follow-up to the JSS, the Junior Super Series. So 18 or under, you could play in these events, and they give basically scholarship money and boxes and invites to some other tournaments. Though I didn't actually end up going to any of the tournaments in the US that qualified me for. I just collected a bunch of scholarship money and booster boxes, and that was cool. But yeah, so I mean, when I really became a pro, I guess I started kind of trying to on the pro tour. Like 2011 was my first pro tour, and at that point there were people, right, who've been playing since the mid 90s or something, right? They already been on the pro tour for 10-15 years. People who I would end up playing with on my team who were already Hall of Famers at the point I started playing Magic. So my perception was definitely I always felt like kind of a newcomer for a while, until actual newcomers, sort of the next generation of Magic player after me, sort of came in.
That's so interesting. So your first pro tour was 2011, you said.
Yeah.
So you essentially won a pro tour, which is Pro Tour Barcelona, like in your second year of playing pro tours. Like that was 2012, right? That was almost exactly 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was. It was May
11th to May 13th. I have this written down.
All right, you came prepared. Yes, that was when I won pro tour. So my first pro tour was in I believe September 2011. It was Philadelphia, the first ever modern pro tour. And then since then I played every pro tour that there's been. I haven't missed one.
Right.
So I qualified for that one from winning a PTQ, and then shortly after I came second at GP Montreal in 2011, which that was like my springboard really. First of all, got me, who was at the time like a poor student, basically have money to go and play in events, but also I got an invite from that to the first pro tour the following year, which was in Honolulu, and then also ratings invite is like the last time ratings mattered. Go to the old worlds in San Francisco in 2011, which is the last of the old style world championships. So basically, and then the following pro tour after that, I managed to do well enough of those things to get like a pro club invite for one tournament, and that was Barcelona, which I ended up winning.
Right.
Kind of since then I've basically been on the train, as they call it, like either the top status at the time of platinum or gold, or then later as they changed it to MPL and rivals.
Right. What about right now? I mean, I will go back to those a decade ago, but what about now?
Yeah.
Are you grinding the RCQs? Do you have like just an invite because of your previous status?
Yeah.
Like what's
So
the deal with that?
they, well, so yeah, there's multi-part question, I guess. First thing that, yeah, they, from my understanding, it for multiple people have confirmed this, but I haven't actually looked into it myself, that I have invites for a year worth of the regional events or whatever, which in Canada there's two of them, one in the West Coast sort of, and one in the East. The first wave, I believe, is Toronto and Calgary, and then the next one is Montreal and Vancouver, I think. And so I think, yeah, I believe I'm qualified for all of those. So I don't have to play the like more local events to qualify for them. And I think I'm planning to go and attend those, but mostly I'm pretty detached from Magic now. I've been moving away from it for a little while, even before they kind of shut things down. Partly because I expected them to shut things down, but also just for my own mental health and the fact that, you know, it's a long time to play professional Magic for 10 years, and it just wasn't bringing me the same level of enjoyment as it used to. You know, the game's changed, but also I've changed, and I tend to get bored of things fairly quickly. That's one of my weaknesses. So Magic is, you know, quite a unique game with all sorts of facets, but it's still, given enough time, still kind of got a bit boring for me, at least parts of it.
That's really interesting. So what are you really into now that's non-Magic? Like I saw you tweeted about playing Go and your opponent calling you a luck stack. Like what is that what you're into right now? Like just
well, not Go
various...
specifically, but I mean, Go is a game that I played before I played Magic, but never really competitively. It was just when I was in elementary school. Okay, maybe I have to go back even further to make this.
Sure, I know you were a
sense.
serious chess player, so we'll definitely talk about that.
So starting with that, I mean, that when I was about 2 years old, my dad taught me how to play chess.
Holy moly!
At that point, you know, I was not very good. I had a major handicap.
Are there actual 2-year-olds that are really good at chess, like maybe Bobby Fischer or?
Well, I don't think he even started playing it that young, but I mean, it's all, of course, being good is relative. But I learned how to move the pieces and stuff, and you know, by the time, you know, I was 5 years old, I was playing in tournaments, and like I was in my elementary school, which basically was, you know, kindergarten, which was 5-year-olds, all the way to like 11-year-olds in grade 6. I was as the best player, and I'd play in tournaments representing my school, playing against other people who were, you know, the other best 11-year-olds from other school. And yeah, so I was pretty competitive with that, and involved in the chess club at my elementary school. And there was also like a strategy board game club that I was part of, and one of the games there that they played was Go, and so I played a little bit of that there, but there were no tournaments and stuff. And I always find that the best way to really learn more about a game is just kind of being thrust into the fire, you know, of like a tournament, and just losing horribly, and just seeing what, you know, these players who are much better than you do, and learning from that, right? And I haven't really had that experience with Go. I was just playing a little bit online. You know, I've been this board game arena website where they have all kinds of different board games. I've been playing a bunch just casually, and Go is one of them. I just had like a half hour to play a game or something, and so I just fired one off, and my opponent was complaining in what I thought was a very amusing way, so I shared it on Twitter. But I'm not really into Go. I'm kind of still trying to figure out what the next thing for me in my life is after Magic. I've tried a few things, and none of them have really felt like they fit. Like in terms of money, I did fairly well in Magic. To the point that I'm one of the few people who really made a living despite not writing articles regularly, and through some, you know, good and lucky investments and stuff, I'm comfortable for the next while. So I have a buffer to find something to do before, you know, I run out of money. But I'm not filthy rich or anything. I'm gonna have to find something else to do. But it's the more important thing for me is to find something that I enjoy doing, that is interesting for me.
Would you say that Magic for you even like 3 or 5 years ago wasn't that interesting anymore, but it was like there was at least a financial incentive to do it, like whether it was Rivals or MPL. There, you were, as I understand, you were contracted to stream as part of that, and you did, 10 hours a week or whatever it was. So would you say that even back then, like the fire wasn't the highest level it's been, but there it still felt like there was a legitimate way to make a living through Magic, but you were just not, but still you weren't like super invested in it compared to maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah. So I mean, my investment in Magic definitely waned. I when I was first into Magic, I was super into it. I would play all the time, always be, kind of Jerry T style. When I was at school, I'd have a notebook where I'd be scrolling ideas for decks and
Yeah.
putting things out in my head
Yeah.
and reading every article I could, and all that stuff. Even in my pro career, I wasn't really one of the people who was like a big workhorse. My main thing was, I'm much more of a theorist than a practical person in some ways. I would read articles, I would understand metagames and formats and decks. I wouldn't necessarily play that much. I'd get more out of watching other people play, for example. But I was still very involved and very much into it. Flying around, playing in events. It was good for me. I'd say the moment where it kind of shifted was following the first time they offered a slot to the World Championship based off of who got the most Grand Prix points, which was the 2015 season. And so that season, I hadn't originally been planning to go for that way to get an invite to Worlds, but I had a reasonable number of points, and then I basically came first place at GP Krakow, and then got a top 64 in Toronto, and then came second place in Atlantic City in the period of like 3 weeks. And then suddenly I had a whole bunch of points, and I was like second place in the race. I thought, okay, well, this is worth doing. And it's a different level of grind when you're playing a GP every weekend. Like there's one point where I was in the span of 2 weeks, right? I was in like 4 different continents, basically for 3 days at a time, just playing a tournament and then leaving. And it's brutal, and kind of that being forced to play Magic sort of when you don't want to is the easiest way to turn something that you love into the grind. Kind of since then, I still liked it, but like the love was kind of gone. And a few years after that, like I'd say 2018, at that point I was looking to do something else. And it's just hard to walk out when you're basically getting paid a whole bunch of money to do fairly little, right? Like as a platinum level Magic Pro, you have to basically attend 4 tournaments a year, and they give you $20,000. And of course, MPL and Rivals, it's even more money than that. And it's hard to leave when you have that, and you're so much. My social circle at the time also was surrounded with Magic, so it was just like an excuse to go and see friends. And I kind of started trying less and less and less, but I was still good enough that even my low attempts would still get me, gold or platinum status, or MPL. Like I made MPL without top 8ing a single event that year, and it was. I was also not in the best place mentally, and kind of walking away from that. Again, I don't have infinite money or anything, so the money was definitely a factor. And now with the money gone, it's not really worth it, and it's kind of a boon for me in some ways, because I sort of wanted to walk away, and now I don't have kind of that excuse to keep hanging on.
Are you a person that looks back at what you did in your life? Do you reflect on those kind of things, or do you just tend to look forward?
Yeah, I'm definitely a person who looks back. I mean, I've been fairly public about this, that I've suffered from depression a lot of my life, and they say that like anxiety is a disease of you being too often in the future, and then depression is one of being too often in the past. And so it's definitely a big weakness of mine that But when it came to Magic, in some ways, it was a strength that I would look back and analyze every possible mistake I made, what I should have done. Of course, in real life, you can't go back and fix those mistakes. You're not going to be put in that scenario again. When you're playing Magic, you are often going to be end up in that same spot in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of that perfectionism and over analyticalness. I don't know, that's not really a word, but that way of looking back and overemphasizing basically all the mistakes that I made is still something I struggle with, but I have gone better with that, and it's definitely something that I do. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's just everyone has a natural tendency or disposition, right? So I think it's sort of like when we look at a leader or a CEO or something, and we're just like, wow, why do they have these flaws? Like, why can't they change that about themselves? They're like ruining this business, or they're like psychopaths or whatever, or sociopaths. But that kind of got them to where they are, right? So I would say that maybe not a great analogy, but your tendency to look back on things and maybe dwell too much on things is also attributed to, it also helped helped you become successful in your pursuits, right? Whether it was chess or Magic, or just things that require like a ton of willpower and just like looking back on stuff, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I think almost everybody who's succeeded at pro Magic, or probably other things to that level, has some kind of unhealthy level of obsession, of varying degrees. It kind of takes a little bit of that, at least, to get there. And of many things, Magic is kind of a funny one to pour yourself into, but that's the one that I did. And I do often think back, like, what if I'd put the same amount of energy that I put into Magic into something else, right? Let's say, the classic thing of trying to build a business or move up the ranks of one, right? Or the cliched try and cure cancer nonsense,
I think I made reference to that. I said, like, if Magic players all did non-Magic things, we probably cure cancer or have world peace by now, just because the collective is just so smart. Or just...
but that's the thing. There's different kinds of intelligence. I was reading a thing that interested me recently, that was saying that there's two types of problems, right? There's clearly defined problems where you can clearly find an answer to them, and there's more less clearly defined problems where there's not necessarily a clear answer, right? Mm-hmm. I'm very good at the first one. If there's a puzzle to be solved, or I have to find a line in a game of Magic, right, or a game of chess, I'm good at finding that, right? Finding the optimal line. But like when it comes to life, it's way too broad. Like, what should I be doing with my life? That's a question that there's not really a clear answer. There's no real obvious thing. There's no, you can analyze and you can't ever come to a real conclusion.
Yeah, and philosophers have tried for millennia, right? I would also think that cure cancer is part of the second category. Like, it's not like a deterministic thing where you can just put it into like chess, or like something where an AI could just like brute force compute it and just figure out the answer, right? So yeah, definitely a generalization. But the second question I had, just going back to it, is just regrets, right? Are you someone in general that has regrets? I know you look back, but do you feel the regrets when you look back, or is it just like looking back to figure out how I can do better, or just looking back for the sake of looking back?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing was definitely looking back to see how I could do better, but then that kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with me with the regrets, because then I regret that I didn't do the thing that I figured out I could have done better. And the way my mind works, obviously the logical thing, when I now that, let's say I've gone through therapy and have better tools to analyze how I'm thinking, I can see, well, that's not logical. You only know that the answer now. You didn't know the answer then. You did the best you could. With you have one play that wins the game and one that loses, and you took the one that lost, and it cost you so much. You can look back and, why didn't I do that? There's so many tournaments where I can look back and regret that I didn't play this deck or that deck, that I made this play, and then other things in life, various like relationships that I've been in, or other life choices I've made. you can always go back and why didn't I, when I was a kid and I had all these chess winnings, why didn't I invest it all in Apple stock? Or what, remember at one point with the Wizards payout system, you could get it all in Bitcoin. And when Steve Rubin won his
what
Pro Tour,
really? There was a chance of getting that out in Bitcoin.
And he looked at it, if instead of the 40,000, yeah, he could have gotten $4 million.
You could put your grandkids through college by now, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, have an empire or something. The FBI would be digging through my stuff, whatever. But it's easy to have regrets. But I've gotten to the point where I'm mentally healthier, that I can be like, look back and say, well, I'm only looking back on these things because I made the decision then, and all these mistakes, let's say, have shaped who I am now, right? That I could have done something, let's say, I could be a multi-billionaire right now, but would I have learned the lessons? Like, would I have grown, let's say, the humility? Would I have made the friends that I have now? Maybe not. And those things do shape who I am. And this is the road that I'm on. I don't get to travel any of those other paths. I'm not in a science fiction novel. Yeah. So I only get to work with where I am now. I mean, it's also, I guess, a useful perspective in Magic, for people who realize they made a mistake in the game they're playing, and then they start to tilt off, and but instead you just got to focus up and do what you can now. And that's where I'm at, or at least trying to be at. It's a difference between knowing what you should do and actually doing it.
Are you able to share maybe some of the tools that you learned in therapy? Like you touched on some of them, but just
I mean, there's the kind of the basic things that called like mind traps, where you can basically look and ask yourself questions like, why are you thinking this thing? Am I falling into any of these potential traps? Fortune telling being a classic one that I would have. Let's say that I'm making assumptions about the future or what people think, based off of what I think, but I don't actually know how they think or how the future is going to do, because other people aren't the same as me, for example. Other things, you can be minimizing the positive. That, like, in times when I'm really depressed, I feel like I'm a loser. Everybody hates me. I've wasted my life. But there's a lot of things that I have accomplished. There's a lot of people who do care about me, and what is wasting your life actually mean, right? And so it's easy to put yourself in a mindset to look at things through the rose-colored lenses that we all wear. None of us really look at the world fully rationally, right? And that was, I've had a bunch of therapy and stuff, but that was like the perspective that worked the best with me, because I struggle to make myself believe things that I don't think are true. And so when you're feeling really down, you feel everything, you're awful, everything's awful, things are never gonna get better, and you just believe that it's going to get better, and it's hard to do that. But it's easier to look and examine all the things you're thinking and show that, sure, you might be right, but you have no actual evidence, and that there's a flaw in your thinking. You're not being as rational as you think you are, and to kind of create some room for doubt in the negativity, which can lead to positivity.
Are there stuff in your sessions about just generally being less hard on yourself? I feel like you're touching on that. And also just because when I had a few sessions myself, like that was my biggest takeaway, understanding, of course, that therapists have different techniques, but I sort of like realized going through these sessions, and it was actually really cathartic. I think I actually cried after one of the sessions or during one of the sessions, because I was just like, I think the therapist just told me, just lean into, not in these words, right? But just, I felt like it was just leaning into not being hard on yourself, and everything that's happened to you up to this point is you're a product of circumstance. Like we kind of went into like why I behave the way I do because of my parents or my upbringing, and just not trying to blame anybody, but just like trying to understand that there are reasons for me to think this way or behave this way. And we're all like manipulated or a product of our environment, and just don't be so hard on yourself. I think that was a big thing for me. Just it felt like there's a big weight that was lifted from my shoulders when I initially went through that, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I went through something similar, and I agree with what you're saying. Like, the way I think my therapist sort of phrased is that all of us are kind of on our own paths, right? Where we don't all start at the same place, we don't all move at the same speed, we don't all have the same obstacles and stuff, right? So that we often judge ourselves based off of other people and where they're at, and that's not a fair comparison. And kind of where you're at, all the things that have happened to you have made you you, and you have to accept yourself, right? And kind of love yourself. It comes first, right? Just you are who you are, and there's nobody else like you. As whatever as cliche as that is, but
Yes,
it is true. And yeah, the path you've taken was partly prescribed for you, right? And you just get to kind of decide now what path you're going to take. And
but it's really hard because I feel like whether you see a therapist or you read something similar in a book or someone tells you and you feel like this is all good common sense, but I think in the moment it's just really hard to get yourself out of that. And I have to preface this to say
it's
that
so hard.
I've not been diagnosed as clinically depressed. Like, I don't think I was ever at that. So I don't want to trivialize my experience, other people's experiences by kind of what I went through. But even not being diagnosed, I was sort of like, I felt trapped sometimes, just like, it's just hard because, like, yeah, of course it's sort of like, you read this article that says you should play Magic this way, then why are people not playing it this way? Like, the information's out there. Clearly you should just do that. You should just not make mistakes. You should always like think 2 seconds before making a play, which I think you've said in the past, right? Just spend an extra 2 seconds on it. But how come we don't do it? And we're like, fuck, I misplayed, like, right after I played. So it's easy to understand the theory, but it's so hard to apply it. And even now I find myself like going back to some dark places once in a while, just because you know what I mean, right? It's easier said than
Yeah.
done. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of therapy, and I definitely recommend a therapist over reading it in the book. I mean, that's part of, they're there to kind of trying to help you to actually get it going. And step one, of course, is knowing, right? And then actually applying what you know is the future thing. And I also have moments where, yeah, it's darker. Like, people talk about beating depression and stuff, and like I feel it's more just like holding it at bay. You have like, and like getting therapy is like having a flashlight or a torch or whatever, right? And being able to shine light on the darkness. And so I view it like you have tools. You're better able to deal with what's there, and you have to put it into action. And I think everybody would benefits from some therapy, whether they've been diagnosed as clinically depressed or not. There's different kinds of therapy. Like, what I mainly had that was helpful for me is what's called the CBI, or cognitive behavioral therapy, which basically ties in the links between thoughts and behaviors, and kind of how it's like a feedback loop in some ways, that you act certain ways will make you think certain ways, and thinking certain ways makes you act certain ways. So if you can kind of hijack that loop and force it both positively or negatively, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really hard, and it's a lot of work. And compared to some other things, like there's first of all, there's a fair amount of stigma about mental health versus, let's say, physical health. And also, in many ways, right, the enemy you're facing is yourself. So it's like it's one of your toughest fights, because you're like your depressed half, let's say, knows all your weak points, right? Knows all the ways to like attack you, make you feel like crap. So you have to fight back just as hard. And that's why have someone else on your side to push you a bit is useful.
It's hard because you have that inner voice that everybody has, and you think the inner voice is you, but sometimes the inner voice is not actually you, and it's actually leading you down this path of misguidedness, if that's a word, or self-destruction. And it's sort of like, I don't know if you heard this. It's like, sometimes if you think of your inner voice, pretend your inner voice is actually manifested as a person that's outside of you. Like, you would just break it off with that person within 2 minutes, right? Because it's just terrible. This person is toxic, and this person is telling you shit all the time that you don't want to hear. The person knows all your buttons. The person knows like how to push it, and the person just doubting you all the time. If this was a person, you would just be like, get the fuck out of my life right now. But you can't, and it's just always in your head, right? So
yeah,
it's
well,
you have to like work super hard to fight that. Yeah.
Yeah, like certainly when it comes to like self-talk things, like one of the things my therapist said is, these are these things you say to yourself. Would you stop and ask yourself, like, would you say these things to a little kid? Like, let's say, you're fat or whatever. You're not going to find like a 7-year-old kid and say those things to them, right? That's incredibly mean. Even if it's true, right? You're still not going to say it. So like, why are you saying that to yourself, right? Why are you not treating yourself with that level of compassion?
Right. Right. I think that's what self-care or self-love or compassion really means, is just like, don't treat yourself even worse than you would treat like a random 7-year-old kid on the street, right? Which is what we tend to do, I think. The reason I went and asked you about the regret and looking back is because I talked to your friend, KYT, Karyun Tom, also a Canadian legend, although maybe...
Oh, absolutely.
In a different way, legend for the Canadian Magic community. And he said he remembers having lunch with you right before you went to Barcelona for Avacyn Restored. And I was really surprised to hear you tell me that that was only your second year of grinding the PT or at the PT level, because from his recollection, like that was kind of like a sliding doors moment for you. Like you were telling him that, maybe this is it. Like, if I don't do well in this tournament, I'm done, like finished, right? I'm out of Magic. So maybe take me through what was in your mind space at that time in, 2012, having lunch with him.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of it is to do with, people get to see your journey as a pro, and especially when you're watching, you see the pros when they top 8, right? You don't really pay attention to the failures, right? Like some people are like, oh, Seth Manfield never loses. He's always in the top 8. Says, well, like I'm there at the tournaments. I get to see Seth Manfield's a great Magic player, is doing well, but he loses plenty. Everybody loses plenty. There's a lot of time they're out. Like the public doesn't really experience that because they kind of zoom in on the top 8. The coverage, overwhelmingly shows the people who are X and O in the tournament or whatever. But you as a person who plays Magic, a game of variance, most of the times you personally experience entering a tournament, you're not going to win. You're going to leave having not done as well as you'd hoped, because the finishes that are really valuable in Magic are the ones that are outside of the statistical norm, right? Whether it's winning a tournament or top 8ing a tournament. If you enter a PTQ as the best player there, it's still hard to really be expected to win, let alone, like a Pro Tour event where you will top 8.
I think, by the way, I think Jarvis, you mentioned this once. He said something to me like, if you're not a Pro Tour level player, you're like 5% to win this or 3% to win. And if you're a Pro Tour level player, congrats, you just went from 3% to 5%, or like it's still a really, really small chance, right? I don't know if you agree.
I might disagree with that. I think like the actual, there's a big gap between like the actual top players and like the next level below that. And
sorry, I got you sidetracked. Please.
Yeah. But anyways, so I spent a long time, since I started playing Magic competitively before I ended up playing Magic professionally. So for me involved, like I believe I played 14 PTQ top 8s where I didn't win a single one until I think, or the 14th one, I believe I finally won. So, that, and I think at that time, on average, I top 8 like maybe half the PTQs I played or something in that period of time, which was like 5 years or something, right? Because I was 23 when I played my first Pro Tour, and I was, probably, I think 18 when I played my first PTQ.
So in your mind, that felt like a drought, right? Because you were not able to convert a top 8 into an actual win. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a big thing, because at the PTQ level, coming second place doesn't, you get a box and a handshake, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Congrats.
Thanks for trying. And obviously it's, in terms of prizes and stuff, it's better than going O2 drop. But in terms of emotional feeling, I'll tell you, it feels worse, because at least for me, I've always felt worse getting really close to the goal and then failing in the last moment.
Well, nobody wants to be the silver medalist, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Though, I mean, most people would take that. Then, if you can just suddenly hang a silver Olympic medal on your chest versus having nothing, they would take it. But the whole thing is that to get there, you have to put in all this years of effort and grinding and work and talent, and you finally get up to that last moment, and it's you versus one other person to be the gold medalist, to be able to say you're the best in the world, and then you just miss by that much.
It's not a great analogy, because it's not deterministic. Like you and that person in the final, obviously there's a variance in that best of 3 or best of 5 anyways, right? So
yeah. So anyways, it took a while, and again, during all this time, I was battling with my mental health. I mean, really, I think my first major depressive episode was basically when I was 18, and at least that's when I was diagnosed. It might have started a bit before. And magic was kind of my escape for a while. And in 2011, when I top aided when I came second in GP Montreal, which that one didn't hurt that much because I was kind of new to it. So for that was like an amazing performance. But I felt like, okay, I'm going to give this pro magic thing like one more shot, because actually even the PTQ that I won also was like, I'm going to give this is going to be like my last PTQ that I play. And then I won. And funnily enough, that's been fairly successful thing for me in my psychological last tournaments. I've usually done pretty well. Kind of like what now has become the Andre Strasky meme of I'm retiring now.
The Strasky method, I think. Yes.
Yeah, the Strasky method. Well, I'd like to think that maybe I'd influenced him a little bit, because after years working together. But yeah, that was effective for me. So going into Barcelona, like I'd played a couple events, and I basically needed like 2 pro points to lock up gold going forward, to make me qualified for everything. But if I've missed, then I'd have no qualifications at all. And I kind of, I decided I wasn't going to enter into like the PTQ circuit anymore. I wasn't going to play PTQs anymore. I kind of, it was like I'd given myself this shot, and I either was going to make it or I was not going to make it, and walk away and find something else.
So it was really the 2 points. Like it was very kind of black and white. Either you got on that train or you didn't, and you walk away.
Yeah, and part of it was, again, I was not doing particularly well with my mental health. Like, there's a famous story that I've talked about many times, that that most people, they fly to Magic tournaments. For Barcelona, my teammate David Kaplan and I, we took a cruise ship there because we didn't have Wizards paid for plane tickets. We had to pay our own way. And during that time of the year, the cruise ships change from circling the Caribbean to going around the Mediterranean. And so there's very cheap cruises across the Atlantic. So we'd taken a boat, which was great. I mean, it's the perfect environment to test for a tournament. Mm-hmm. You're traveling, but also you have things for entertainment but also constant food and comfort. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would spend a lot of time like outside in the balcony, just listening to music, looking at like the middle of the ocean and stuff. And yeah, I was, I have some stuff that I wrote to myself, at the time, that I was not happy. And though, of course, sometimes I've done my best work at moments like that, whether it's writing stuff or magic related things. Mm-hmm. But because that's when I came up with Feeling of Dread as the missing piece for that deck, and ended up winning the Pro Tour. But yeah, I've kind of always had doubts. I never really had that much confidence in myself, and combined with depression and things. Now I'm at the point, I now have kind of, with the Dunning-Kruger curve, I'm at the point where I do have confidence in my ability of magic, even though now I'm kind of washed. I'm a washed up boomer or whatever, right? Is the next thing. but there was a point where I know, like, I'm pretty sure I was, if not the best, but like top 3 in the world for a year or two,
That's the thing about depression, from what I've heard from others, is that like it always finds a way to beat you down. Like you could be top 3 in the world, but there's still going to be something in the back of your mind that says you're not good enough, or something, right? I don't know if you felt that when you
yeah.
became the PT champ,
Yes, I mean, like winning the PT was kind of, first of all, surreal. Didn't really feel like it was real for a while, and at the time, I wasn't like super happy about it. I was still like kind of so in the zone of just like playing my match, and combined with not feeling necessarily so great. But it was really like seeing the other people around me, my friends, so happy. Like that kind of lifted me up more.
Yeah,
you can, if you watch the old coverage of that pro tour, you can see like I won the pro tour and I'm just kind of like unsideboarding my cards, and my teammates surround and they're outside like shouting, singing "Oh Canada" or whatever. And then I turn to look at them, and then I break out in a big smile. Like that's finally when, like, I feel something then. And yeah, so the depression can definitely steal those moments from you. And even when you're at the top, even when everything looks like it should be great, right? Sometimes that's when you feel the worst, because when things are outwardly look bad, it's easy to like say, okay, I can fix this, right? I can get better on my game, I can do better at my job, I can like meet someone and get into a relationship or whatever, that will solve my problem, right? But you go and you do all those things, and then you still feel crappy because none of those things was your problem. Your problem was you, right? And your depression. But now you don't have all those things as an excuse anymore, and you feel even worse because all those things you thought were going to help didn't help.
I have to assume you never really played or did Magic for any sort of recognition. It was always more like a career / intellectual challenge. But did becoming the PT champ also change? Like it must have changed how people perceived you. And was that a good thing, or did it fuck you up in some weird way?
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, for me, I really got into Magic. Yeah, not for the prestige or recognition as much as for the intellectual pursuit, and not really for the money. Nobody gets into it for the money. Like I kind of stayed in it because I could basically get effectively free money. I didn't really have to do much work, and kind of I could deal with my depression most of the time, and still have this thing that I could do. But becoming a PT champ was definitely a change. I still wasn't really respected by the pros, by my peers, and that was something actually that I did want. I did want
Can
my
you
peers.
be more specific on that? Why was there not a level of respect that you thought should
Well,
have been?
I think a lot of it is in the pro community is very different than I think the, like, let's say the fan community, right? The fan community sees someone who wins a tournament or top eight's a tournament or something, says, "Wow, that player's good. They're great." The pro community doesn't care as much necessarily about your results. If you accumulate a bunch of results, then they think, okay, this person's probably good, right? Because there's now a bunch of evidence. But one event is not enough evidence for people to think that.
Oh, it's kind of like the Hall of Fame argument in a nutshell. It's like, what's your body of work? Yeah.
Yeah, it's your body of work, but also a lot of the times, like, it's pros really, at least the way I function is that I value much more watching someone play and seeing the decisions they make at different points, like from their perspective, right? And then other times also just like having conversations with people, understanding what they think about Magic, like what they would do in this perspective. I find that way more valuable in terms of personally gauging how good someone is than this person has 2 Pro Tour top 8s, or this person's won a Grand Prix, this person's won a Pro Tour. And certainly there's often a perspective in the pro community that someone who wins a Pro Tour but doesn't have anything else, they're just like a one-hit wonder, right? There's a bunch of people I could name who've won one Pro Tour, right, but who are not really respected as great Magic players by the pro community. And you can say this speaks to elitism or whatever, but I'm not gonna say any of those people's names. I'm not going to make them feel bad about their accomplishments. That's not the goal. The goal is like,
you're just saying that you were in that boat at some point, right?
Yeah, and I was definitely in that boat at some point. I think that really kind of, you know, I was also somewhat of an unknown because a lot of the pro communities, there wasn't really a Canadian pro community, right?
Yeah.
Canada had kind of been off the map for a while until I sort of put it back on the map, because I think a lot of people in Canada got motivated from following my win to see that like it was possible. You know, it wasn't just these American super teams or, you know, the Japanese powerhouses or whatever that were winning these things. You know, that some outsiders could win too. And so that changed, and I started, you know, I was working with some Canadians, and then nowadays it seems like there's a lot of really good Canadian Magic players, you know, from online, but also from kind of growing up in the next generation, and I'm really pleased about that. But at the time there wasn't, so I was kind of unknown. I wasn't really a big online player. I hadn't played in any of the SEG circuits. I hadn't really had the money before to participate in a bunch of the GPs. So a lot of the American pros didn't really know me, and so they got to know me a bit more at, you know, at Worlds and following Pro Tours and more Grand Prix circuit and stuff. And the fact that, like, you know, in the 1 year I won 3 Grand Prix in like 2013 and 2014 season. I think that was kind of the point where I sort of was cemented as being one of the top players in the world, you know, instead of just that lucky kid who won a tournament with miracles. But I think in the public's eye, I remained that maybe that lucky kid for a while, especially because like I beat the fan favorite in John Finkel, and you know, there are a lot of people who are angry. Oh, why I wanted John Finkel to win? He's my favorite, you know, and various things like that. So
yeah,
there's that, and I could feel some of that, but a lot of people really, you know, really told me that me winning that meant a lot to them, or that was the first time they watched coverage, and it was really cool watching me win. And I would end up signing playmats and stuff, and I felt a little awkward about it, you know, but at least the nice thing about Magic Fame is, you know, unlike, let's say, if you're a movie star, you get to turn it off as soon as you leave the convention center. It's pretty much gone.
Yeah, you wouldn't get recognized on the street. Although I think
it's happened
did
like
get
2
recognized
times,
on a bus one time, but he told me. But
yeah, I got recognized, I think, 1 time in the metro and 1 time at a grocery store, and I think that's
exactly the level of fame that I think we should all aspire to have. Is just not like you could turn it off when you want to, right?
Yeah, yeah. It did affect me though, in that like something I used to love to do. I used to love going to like F&M every weekend and going and just hanging out at my local LGS, and it changed how I felt about that, and like going to my LGS and playing local events and playing pre-releases and stuff, because suddenly like I wasn't just one of the group anymore, like another anonymous person who just like liked playing Magic and was there and could just be my whatever. I was suddenly like a figure, and like the kids in the corner like looking at me and whispering, you know, and people would play against me. They'd be like, "Oh no, I can't believe it," and they're like, "You really need the packs from this pre-release win? Like, can't you let me the win?" And it's just like I would just always feel bad when I go there and to beat someone. Like either I beat someone and I feel bad because like for them it's a big deal. For me it's like small potatoes. Yeah. Or I would lose and then like be like, "Oh, I can't believe you lost. You must be really bad." Good, you know, like whatever. And so it was just like a lose-lose scenario.
Okay, I was gonna ask if this is all in your head. Obviously, it wasn't all in your head because like the people were actually reacting around you. So yeah,
it's not all in my head, but it, you know, it's a large part in my head. A lot of my universe is in my head. That's partly what's made me good at you know, at playing these strategy games and stuff, because I can visualize the potential universes following every decision tree. But it's in real life, it can be overwhelming at times, you know. It's
personally, I love that. I love, like, I'm not anywhere on your level. I just love like hearing about pros just like randomly crushing, or as somebody said, like, I think there's a term, smurfing. Like you just show up and just crush. Because I've seen like people like tweet, "Oh yeah, I just won the RCQ, just won that," or whatever. Like even if it was, that's good, because like it's a skill-based game, right? And you shouldn't apologize for that. But yeah, well, I mean, maybe taking someone's 2 packs might really
some people love it. I don't mind the games, the second part as much as like the first part of just not really feeling like I belong, like I'm separate. And in some ways, like when MPL happened, that became even bigger, because as a member of the MPL, I was separate even from like the other pros and semi-pros,
Yeah.
that previously, like, there was a gradient difference, but now it was just like a camp difference. Like, there was the MPL and then everybody else, whereas before it was like platinum, gold, and silver. And it's like, sure, I was platinum most of the time, but like the silver people didn't feel like I was just different and getting privileges or something.
Right.
I
Right.
felt more ostracized following that. And I know a lot of other members of the MPL, I think, felt the same way. And I think that didn't help me when I was going through a lot of mental health stuff. And yeah, I mean, I felt that the following just being a PT champ a little bit, that I was no longer anonymous, which I liked going to Magic tournaments being anonymous. Besides the fact that also, like, in the couple of GPs that I did play, could get into some money drafts or whatever with people, and they're like, "Oh, this is just a group of Canadians. We'll beat them.
Take their money."
Bad."
Yeah.
And then KYT and I and this is a third friend of ours, Joey. I remember we went to GPR Land and we just cleaned house, from a bunch of. And then I remember what my highlight was after like handing me $100 after like beating him 3 times in a row. Some guy was like, "No, you played really well." Like, he was a shock. Like, this Canadian kid can play well.
He just felt like he got grifted or something, or just
Yeah, I don't know if he. Well, I mean, he kind of did get grifted, but it's just like but that's not the main thing. It was more just I liked going to Magic tournaments because I felt like I belonged. And in high school and stuff, I was bullied. I was always like the nerdy kid, as whatever, as cliched as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when there were kind of at Magic tournaments and Magic stores, I kind of felt like I found my people. We were a little smart people, but maybe a little bit underachievers. Kind of a little bit social outcasts in some ways, and kind of nobody really cared about any of that. It was just like, hey, isn't this card awesome? Or wow, that was a cool play. Or can I see your deck list? It's sweet, and all that stuff. And I kind of lost a bit of that camaraderie when I was suddenly a PT champion. I was viewed as other, right? I was like a figure in the community instead of a person.
It sounds like it might have had also some other unhealthy side effects, because you said, like the year or 2 years after you were winning a lot of GPs. Can I assume that you were partially doing that to try to prove to people that you had longevity, that you actually had results beyond the PT win? Like, you wanted to, like, you had a chip on your shoulder? Can I safely assume that?
Oh yeah, I think you definitely can. I mean, especially I spent a long time chasing my second Pro Tour top 8.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think for people paying attention, they can, like, I had very consistent results at the Pro Tour level. I'd basically be in the top 50 of the event like half the time or something. I cashed half the Pro Tours I would play. And when they started the top 25 rankings or something, I think I was in it the second most. Maybe I think it was basically in terms of like consistency. I think Reed Duke was like number 1, and I was like number 2. And it's always prefer being number 1, but if you have to be behind someone, Reed Duke's not a bad person for it to be.
Yeah.
But yes, but I didn't really have any flashy performances. I had like. I would come top 32 a bunch. I'd come top 16 sometimes, top 64 a bunch, but those are not finishes that most people really pay attention to, especially, like some pros would say, hey, he's always doing well, like always with a bunch of pro points, whatever. But I kind of felt like I really wanted to, get that other Pro Tour top 8. I wanted to put together a Hall of Fame resume, basically. For me, a lot of my time playing Magic was wanting to become a Hall of Famer. And then the year I finally became eligible, even though I personally don't think that I have a good enough resume, they removed the Hall of Fame. So I was never allowed to be voted in.
Well, I mean, there's also a side discussion. I think you mentioned you had this in your podcast with KYT, which is sort of like, what is the value of a Hall of Fame today? And I would argue that it's very minimized. But just in terms of actually qualifying for the Hall of Fame in a vacuum, how close were you? Like, because I hear pros talking about these metrics, like, it's like you put this people's achievements on a spreadsheet, and it's like you need this many number of like top X's in whatever to be in the conversation. Like how close were you to that, to being Hall of Fame in your mind?
I mean, you mean like would I vote for me, or did I think?
I mean, of course you would vote for yourself, right? But I'm just saying that like,
well,
is there some sort of
not of
objective
course I vote for
criteria
myself. Like,
on how
like
how close you were to being Hall of Fame? Like if you have like, you know, 1 or 2 additional finishes, like in your mind, what was that criteria?
yeah, I think like one PT top 8, maybe 2 more PT top 8s, and I think with 1 more top 8 PT top 8, I'd probably have had a reasonable shot, and with 2, I'd probably be in for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how you would, and you know, GP results, I don't know how people weigh that and stuff. Different people have different methods on how they vote for such things. Some people have, you know, they ignore GP results. It's just all Pro Tour top 8s. Some people look at, you know, win percentage like stats, where my numbers were better. I think they've gone down since the last few years. I basically just I've been completely phoning it in. I think I'm still hanging around the 60% win rate mark.
So the R word, do you have regrets about that, like not making it to the
yeah
Hall of Fame?
Well, I mean, I as it turns out, they stopped the Hall of Fame before, because you had to have been playing for 10 years, right, since your first Pro Tour for them to allow you in the Hall of Fame. And as soon as my 10 years was up, that was the year that they stopped having the Hall of Fame. The year before me, so I wouldn't have gone in even if I had 3 more Pro Tour top 8s or whatever.
Right, and that was something entirely out of your control, just like the policy. Yeah.
So, you know, so in some way, I wanted it less for the fact that it gave all these benefits and stuff, and more for, you know, the recognition kind of, and again, more for my peers than anything. I haven't really chased fame from like the public. If I had, I would have written regular articles and stuff to become better known, you know.
Probably would have streamed more, or I don't know, did some more cosplays.
I mean, I streamed when I streamed. I decided I was going to try streaming when the MPL streaming contract happened, but I wasn't going to do, you know, the bare minimum. Just I was going to either dive in and see if it was something I liked or not, and that's kind of how I approach a bunch of things. You know, I often go in. I either go, you know, full throttle or not, and I went full throttle. You know, I was streaming like 8 hours every day, 7 days a week for a month, and my stream was doing pretty well. And you know, I was #1 mythic in a tough time and all various things, and it was cool. But I realized it wasn't really something for me. You know, it wasn't what I've always loved about Magic is like the, you know, kind of the puzzle of it, right? The intellectual exercise of min-maxing and pushing against my past self, right, to be better. And streaming was way more in the entertainment side of things, which is where side of, you know, pro Magic is going now.
And also, I just have a sense that you probably don't enjoy playing 8 hours of Magic a day. It doesn't matter if it's on Arena or you're streaming. Like, it's not even about, am I making money from this or not? It's not even about if people are watching me or not. But the way you described yourself is like, you were never like super hardcore into Magic Online, like grinding. Maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe there.
No, you're absolutely right.
You would think about Magic. It's more about quality over quantity, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I was never I mean, at the very beginning when I started playing Magic, right, I'd play a huge amount of quantity. I was just this game's super fresh and it's fast.
Because you're trying to soak it all in. You're a novice,
yeah. And I want a lot of new things with me. That's the way I go. Like, but yeah, 8 hours of Magic a day was a lot for me, and I didn't particularly enjoy it. In some ways, I enjoyed like interacting with chat and stuff more than just playing that much Magic. I like thinking about Magic. I even like watching Magic. Like watching Magic coverage when it's good players playing. I find interesting. I find it too difficult to watch when it's not good players watching. It frustrates me too much. I'm like, no, don't do that. No, why are you attacking? No, and then it's painful for me, you know, that something.
I mean, I like watching the NBA, but I don't want to watch like minor league basketball or the G League or even the summer league. It's just not good. It's just not a good product. So it's like, why would I want to watch something substandard when I can watch the best of the best, right?
Right. Well, it's not only that, but it's also like, imagine it's like, well, okay, I don't know very many basketball players, so forgive me that I'm comparing myself to LeBron James here. But anyways, it's like LeBron James watching the NBA or watching like, you know, a kid's basketball game. You know, it's like,
I guess he will watch his own kids, but that's another thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll watch my own friends who are playing who are not that good. You know, like they're playing PTQ finals or something. And I'll watch that. But even when I wasn't a pro, I still would find that watching the, like, too stressful. Watch my friends playing, and especially because when they screw up, you're like, no, don't.
You're too invested.
Yeah, it's too invested. In some ways, I always would feel more emotions when my friends would win tournaments than when I would. Like, the best I felt was when Steve Rubin won the Pro Tour. I guess it was Shadows of Innistrad, I think. Yeah.
Okay. There's also something interesting because I talked to your friend Mike Sigris, who is no slouch when it comes to Magic himself. And I'm actually going to read you something that he told me about you. He said,
okay,
Alex is the kind of person, I'm just reading directly. Alex is the kind of person who can just play. Doesn't need practice or anything. Plays nearly perfect all the time. His biggest weakness was always deck selection. He'd like to do something crazy rather than just play the best deck. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, those for a lot of my career, that was definitely the one of my downsides.
It does speak to you're not like mindlessly grinding. Like
it was never
doesn't
never
need practice. Just sort of like thinks about things in your head and just get to work, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've said this to other people that I've kind of, and for Magic players, or at least like pros, you know, let's say for players in general, there's the Mark Rosewater classification of like Timmy, Tammy, whatever, Johnny, Spike, you know, whatever. And then I think that, what is it, Vorthos, Melvin, they added on later. But for like pro Magic player styles, I've always kind of viewed it as like, you know, the best player of all time is you know, people are saying, is it Kai, is it John, right? And in some ways, like the style has been, you know, of Magic player, I've also viewed as like players are often tend to have like a Kai like approach or a John like approach. In that, like, someone else in the Kai style would be, let's say, you know, Brad Nelson. He's famous for, you know, playing a ton, grinding everything out, figuring out, you know, what the metagame is, being extremely well practiced, and then going in and just crushing a tournament because he knows everything that's going on, right? Versus like the John Finkel method of like maybe not doing that as much. You know, maybe you don't get to like the 99% as much, but you're like at your baseline is like higher. You can go into a tournament with maybe not as much practice, but you really
but extreme intuition, right? Just
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And kind of I've always been more in kind of that camp.
Yeah, and that's not anything that you can really train for, right? I'm guessing like you're just kind of innately intuitive.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, it's a lot of like also habits. Like I'm sure, you know, along with like a lot of other people probably listening in school, you know, I was a smarter kid, and like I didn't have to work that hard to be able to get pretty good grades, right? And so you kind of learn to coast more than to necessarily put in the work. So like I can, let's say I have a school assignment, right? I could do it in 1 hour and get 90%, or I can put 10 hours in and get 95%. Like, the answer is pretty simple. I'm going to, you know, there's not really much incentive to get 95. I'll put in the 1 hour and get 90. Whereas some people, it might not necessarily come so easily to them, so that they have to put in, let's say, 5 hours to get, you know, 90%. But then going to get to 95 is not as maybe as big a jump, and they're more used to having to put in that level of work that they'll decide to push it all the way, right? And kind of I've built up those habits over a lifetime of like never really, you know, putting in necessarily that level of work to get things actually to the top, when I could put in a small amount and get it very good. Like when it comes to Magic, for instance, I can pick up a deck blind and play it at 90%, right? or I can put in a whole lot of effort to get it to like 99%. And even like with a day of practice, right, I can get to 95% or something. And for most pro tours, right, like I would either pick up a deck 90 and get it, or like most recent top 8, I guess, was with Tron, where I'd never played a single game with the deck before the tournament. And or like other decks where we would only have built them in like the week before the tournament, but I could pretty easily get to 95 on the last day of just practicing with it. But there's other decks that I have a lot of practice with, and I would get higher amounts, but it's just kind of putting my effort into other things was always somewhat more valuable.
Were you just disinterested, or did you feel like it was just a classic diminishing returns thing? Like, I don't want to spend the time to go from 95 to 96.
Yeah, I think it's more disinterested than the diminishing returns, because I think in like pro Magic in general is diminishing returns, right? Like first 10 hours spent on Magic gives you more of a benefit than.
Is it really better when you're an hour 100 of testing versus hour 10, right? Probably not that much.
Yeah. And I actually found that in some ways, like it's for me personally, the point where I got bored with the deck, when I had like enough, I hadn't quite reached like the full amount of practice to like know everything perfectly, but I was like partway through, like halfway there, let's say, I would actually do worse because I was bored with the decks, and I was like on autopilot more than a little bit of practice. The deck was good for me because I would know some basic ins and outs, but having to rely on actually calculating things rather than just autopilot is hugely beneficial for me.
This feels like another version of the whole beginner's mind concept, but applied to a deck, where it's like, there seems to be more possibilities when you are a quote unquote beginner. And when you get more and more, when you get too familiar with it, maybe in a Magic sense, it's just like you might be more autopiloting in some aspects because you think you've done it all, seen it all.
Yeah. And I think for me also, like keeping myself interested in it, and so that like I'm having fun as well when deck's fresh, I'd play better. And I think in general, I would just Magic in general, I'd play better when it was more fun for me.
So what was the period of time when you worked yourself the hardest intellectually as a Magic player? Was it after the PT win, or was it another period?
Yeah, I think it was like, I think the biggest time I did that was after. I think there was a period where I would just be going to tournaments all the time and playing Magic all the time and thinking of it all the time. So it was, my world was Magic, and that was natural, I guess, when I had like, it felt like I was the best, and had pretty much better results in a lot of ways. But the thing with Magic is the game's constantly changing, and there's so many different forms of it. Let's say, the most classic being limited versus constructed. And there's always more to like improve on. For instance, early on in my career, kind of, I would say that at first I was better at limited than constructed, and then it switched that I was better at constructed than limited, and then towards the end I was better at limited than constructed again. And now, I mean, the recent years, there kind of hasn't really been any limited at the pro level. So there hasn't been any reason to kind of exercise those muscles. And different things have been important, at certain points, like card advantage and kind of like knife fights, equivalent exchanges were valuable. And now it's way more like haymakers, landing a Omnath or a Planeswalker and protecting it, having one big thing.
That snowballs, yeah.
Yeah. So it changes, and I don't know, maybe I could put the same amount of effort in at this time and not be as good because my skills are better for the previous type of Magic. But I don't really know because I'm not putting in the same level of intellectual effort in as I was kind of back then. Something as simple like Jacob Wilson, another great player, said, like, there's with Scrylands back in the day that, everybody else you'd watch would just play Scryland turn one and scry. And I often would like if I could figure out a gap in my curve when I didn't need the mana, I would wait so that I would have more information about what I needed, and that's just like a small difference that, can pay off a huge amount. Because let's say,
totally.
I think on turn one, you play a scry land, you see a land on top. Do you want it or not? Well, you do want to draw another land, but you don't want to draw 3 more lands, right? Whereas 2 turns later, if you've drawn 2 lands, you see a land on the top, easy goes in the bottom.
That's the stuff that I live for, is just the incremental decisions in Magic. Because sometimes it's like, or maybe another one would be like thought seizing on turn 2 or 3, even though you have the mana to do it earlier in the game, because you sort of like try to match the curve of what your opponent could have or not have. I think those intricate decisions, to a large extent, have kind of gone away from the modern game because of the haymakery nature of things. Which is why I love those PV articles where he's just talking about like, should I mulligan this hand, and talks for like 20 minutes about it. Or maybe he might even have an example with the Scryland, because like those are the intricate decisions that I love. But I think we're going away a little bit from that in the modern era, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's kind of, those things are kind of still now even are the more fun things for me in the game. Those little intricate decisions.
So hearing you talk about this stuff, would you say that your humility has gone up over the years as regards to Magic, perhaps?
I think in my humility, yeah, it's varied, because I think there's some points where it was high, like where some ways I was down on myself. I think a lot of the time I would put up false bravado, kind of, because I pretend that I was really cocky and arrogant all the time when I didn't feel that way inside. But I think partly as getting older and wiser, I have gotten some more humility, even if I'm still willing to challenge some youngsters for heavy, high stakes Magic drafts or something. When they start getting too cocky, I have to sure.
It's crazy to imagine what Magic would have been like if Magic Twitter was around 10 or 15 years ago. It probably would have been pretty wild. I think a lot more uncensored, I would say.
Probably, yeah. I mean, when you were talking about saying things as they are or something, like the generation of Magic players before me, there was so many stories of stuff that wouldn't fly nowadays. Things that are definitely unsporting conduct. The guys are playing a match for top 8 of a tournament, and one guy draws a card for his turn, and just like, oh, judge, I need to go to the bathroom really desperately. Okay, they bring him to the bathroom, but he doesn't go. He just puts some water on his face. Comes back, flips over his card. It's like fireball, basically. Will kill you. Had it the whole time.
Yeah.
Other things like that, and of course, there's so many rivalries of people who hated each other.
Oh yeah.
Most part in my era, people have mostly liked each other until the Twitter era started again now, and everybody hates each other again. But I
think Twitter now, though, is kind of like a lot of it is just pretend. I think people don't really hate each other in the same way that there were these kind of like villain heel hero arcs that Magic used to have. Because like I think there's one thing you always hear about, which is just Magic doesn't have any heels, right? Like I guess somebody like Austin Bursavich is like maybe the closest to that. It's just like someone who likes to pick at the scabs.
He's a wannabe heel, but he's not.
You know what I mean, right? Like there isn't someone who like everyone just loves to hate and is like so ubiquitous that it's kind of like the wrestling analogy and all that, right? So
yeah, I know. I get it. Like I tried to do it a bit, play up a bit for the cameras. Let's say in PT London, whereas playing in the top 4, and I interviewed. Says, "What are you going to do?" He's, you're against this guy. What's going to happen? He's going to get Tron. Karn, Amber, boom.
Right.
I'm going to destroy him and stuff like that. Like, I've always been up for playing it up for the cameras a bit,
Yeah. Although something I think you are very good at, maybe we can talk about it, is like, I use this term in the most flattering way, because I think there's a lot of skill involved in just being a very good troll. Like, I hope you're not offended by
definitely
that, because
not.
I see you in the pantheon. Like I think there's LSV, there is Sperling. I interviewed Sperling just because I thought he was like one of the most brilliant trolls that are active in Magic today. And there's you. And honestly, there's not a lot of good trolls, because the art of trolling is really hard. Like you have to make it kind of believable that you really are oblivious, when in fact there's a high level of intelligence that goes into trolling. So maybe can you talk to me a bit about like how
Sure.
you see yourself on that, in that pantheon, or if you agree with my assessment of you?
Yeah, I would definitely agree that I'm a pretty big troll. And yeah, and I would like to view it in the more positive way rather than, I try not to go after anyone.
Maybe joker is maybe a better term.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
like
maybe.
bad connotations with troll, right?
There's some, but yeah, I mean, I think in the Magic community, mostly trolling is viewed as in the jokester, prankster style thing. I mean, when I was a kid, I would do various pranks and stuff. Just an example. Even recently, I saw like it was the middle of the night, someone just walking by on my street. I was up and I just turned my light on, flashed it twice, and then stopped, flashed it twice again, just for no reason, right? But it's like,
just Morse code them,
like,
freak them out.
It's just like, I've also I have a good one with Josh McLean, who was a teammate of mine for a long time, and he's American, but a lot of people would joke that he was Canadian because he's such a nice guy. He would make fun of Canadians a bit. So at one point, he was like, "Oh, you Canadians are so weird. Like you say Z instead of Z in the alphabet. Like, how do you even do the alphabet song? And of course, the Canadian and American alphabet song, other than being Z, it still ends with like, next time won't you sing with me?" But I said, "Oh, next time will you sing with me instead?" Because it rhymes with Z. And he's like, "Oh," okay. And then like a year later, I was in a car with him and John Stern, another Canadian Magic player, and Josh's roommate. And he said, "Yeah, Canadians are so weird. You have this song and it ends in won't we sing instead?" And John Stern just laughs like, "No, it doesn't." And it was completely harmless troll, but and the fact that I was there to see that seed that I planted.
You made him factually believe that there was
exactly
thing.
Yeah. I, things like that. I enjoy little things, but also on Twitter and stuff. There's I believe I have no actual evidence, but the MPL contract has changed over the years, and after the first year and the second year, they added a clause that we're not allowed to make fun of wizards.
The no trolling wizards
unusual
clause?
Legalese, let's say, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like at least it was a reasonable reason why that clause was added, because I was maybe a little vicious. I also didn't like being muzzled by MPL clause, so I made a lot of tweets that could be interpreted multiple ways, but
it was like on the line or something.
Yeah. Well, like at least plausible deniability,
Yeah. Well, you know what they say. For Michael Jordan, they changed the rules of the NBA. You could do 2.5 steps instead of 2 steps, and for Shaquille O'Neal, like you could now pummel him and not like they changed the rules where in the last like seconds, like if you intentional foul him, like he could get the free throws or whatever. It was a technical foul. I don't remember exactly what it was. So I feel like for the greats, if they change the rules for you, that probably means you're one of the greats. So I could plausibly believe that you at some point were the LeBron James of Magic, basically.
Yeah.
That's the criteria right there.
I can appreciate that. If you're talking, both Sperling and LSV are definitely proud company to be with if you're mentioning trolls. I have to say Jacob Wilson's a pretty good
Jacob
troll.
Wilson is up there too, right? Yeah,
he's a bit of a
the dry kind of humor kind of thing, which adds to it.
Andrew Cuneo also, I think, is an excellent troll, and he's maybe underrated because he's so dry that people don't necessarily get it. But he's got a really nice sense of humor and very trollish, especially with old cards and various obscure things.
Okay, so is that your Magic Troll Hall of Fame, or are there others?
I'd have to really think of that on the Hall of Fame. What I have to make a spreadsheet to really check everybody's troll results.
Basically, like the percentage of times their jokes landed and all that stuff. Like you got to analyze the conversion rate. Yeah.
Well, I do remember being on a Pro Tour testing team with both Paul Cheon and Luis, and the three of us were walking to the site in I think it was in Brussels, and there in Brussels they have these like bakeries / cafes called Paul, and we're walking by them and it's closed, and and basically I were making all kinds of jokes about it to Paul as we're going there. The best of which I think was that it doesn't do much business on Sundays or whatever. Like talk because Paul has no PT top 8s.
This is like the mailman doesn't deliver on Sunday, but like the Magic equivalent.
Yeah.
There's a the story behind that with Karl Malone in the NBA Finals, where like they trash talked him before he went and shot like 2 critical free throws, and he ended up breaking it because they said his nickname was the mailman. So they said the mailman doesn't deliver on Sundays. They said that to him like in an NBA playoff game. So and it worked.
Nice. Yeah, it's like
Cheon's underrated. He's a good like Laurel and Hardy to Luis. I get that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, Paul Cheon definitely is a great target for trolling. Just like I viewed him as like Luis's KYT, because I also think KYT a good noun.
I wasn't gonna say, but yeah, I think the analogy fits, right? The glove fits, or whatever the analogy.
Yeah, there's the basically the kind of asshole like guy, and then the friend who's too nice to say anything.
Yeah.
Paul fought back a bit. I think he occasionally would punch Luis when he got too much. Like I think he was close when we were walking there, and we're saying, that Paul place, it's okay. It's not a great cafe. Just pretty average. But
I love how it's all relative, right? Because it's like you could punch down, but in fact the person you're punching down on, and jokingly, is still like in the top 0.01% of Magic players. Like it's all relative.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I prefer making fun of my friends, and and it's also especially making fun of people for things they're actually good at, turning the other way around, like
right. Have you ever made fun of somebody and they were just like truly offended? Like they just totally did.
Yeah, I think it's happened. I think it's happened happened a couple times.
Okay.
It happened. And then I feel bad and I apologize. But there's always a balance, because the closer to the line you are, sort of the funnier it is. But you cross that line, then it's not funny.
Such a tightrope. Yeah.
That's a lot of things with comedy we're seeing more and more nowadays, right? Of comedy is often offensive in a lot of ways, right? So
yeah.
But that's why I prefer doing with people who are very good friends of mine, because then like if I do overstep, then they understand, they know me enough to know that I'm not intending to make them feel or whatever.
I do want to ask you something which is kind of related to a lot of things that we've been talking about up to this point, which is I can't help but feel, as someone who talks to a lot of PT level players in this interview series, but is not in the PT club, that there does tend to be a little bit of the G word, gatekeeping. You're either in the club or you're not. And I want to take back what I said in the beginning, the intro, about how you're part of the old boys club. And let's face it, it's mostly boys. Like you're not.
It's all boys. There's no.
You know what I mean, right? Yeah, it's all men or boys or man boys or whatever. It's like a Judd Apatow movie. It's like there seems to be this very much this mindset of like you're either good enough or you're not. And if you're not in the PT boys club, even if you're like a very good player, like you're a croquis, like you ain't shit, right? And I think you
have to stop you there. I don't know if I can be on a podcast that describes croquis as a very good player. I might have to.
We're gonna have to cut. Might have to like do some editing there. But no offense against the guy.
No,
he's
kidding.
a very, very good streamer, content creator. I'm just saying that I'm not.
He's a chill dude too. I met him in person. he's another. He's a pretty good.
He's a good troll too. Yeah. Yeah, he can take it, which is what I love. Like the thing about trolls is that you have to be able to give it and you have to be able to take it. Like you can't just be one dimensional. So if you can't be in the pantheon unless you can do both ways. And I think he's probably in consideration for top 10 or whatever, that might be like another discussion. We don't want to go down that rat hole, but basically,
I think he's a better troll than he is a Magic player. So.
There you go. Well, we'll quote you on that. It's really hard for me to continue the question now. So back to the gatekeeping thing, it does feel like you've even experienced it at some point. So like then when you kind of make it into the club, you're kind of like, oh man, I worked so hard to be in the club, or maybe subconsciously it's like, yeah, now I can sort of like gatekeep, because like I'll be honest, it's really hard for me to sometimes listen to a lot of like the pro discourse without just feeling like we're better than everybody and you ain't shit, because like, oh, you may be streaming for, playing these things or winning your GP, but you haven't done this, so you're not at our level, right? So are you aware of that, or would you say that I've completely falsely characterized?
No, I don't think you're entirely wrong. So first of all, I mentioned it sort of my experiences against that, right? When I won a P and then I was still not like accepted in the club, as it were.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some gatekeeping there. In terms of actually succeeding in Magic, you can go and do it yourself, right? Without being a member of the club. So that's not being gatekept. It's more that like full acceptance as being like a great player requires a certain amount of evidence to the group, and I think it does vary based off of whether you're liked or whether you're already known by the people, right? Mm-hmm. Like in other areas, I think charismatic people or geographically close or whatever, friends of friends, they get a big step up. Like I can sort of, for instance, view my starting position in Magic versus, let's say, Shahar Shenhar, another great Magic player. And I don't say this to take anything against him, but when he started, he was playing at like the Channel Fireball store or whatever, and then because of that, he like was met and got befriended, and he's a very friendly, nice guy. With like all the Luis and Paul and Raptor and Matt Nass and all those guys, right? Mm-hmm. And so as soon as he starts having a little bit of pro success, they've watched him play, they know him, they like him. Hey, you want to come test with us? And then that gives him, the boost onto the next level fairly easily, painlessly, right? Compared to someone who is coming from, let's say, Magic Online, knows nobody, and is trying to level up that way. It's harder, once they get their first GP top 8 to really push on and be like a pro level player.
Yeah, it's harder. I mean, that's not gatekeeping. That's just sort of the having good fortune to be in a certain location, or being a good networker, or just being in physical proximity to certain regions of Magic players. I guess it's like that in actually a lot of industries, it's also harder for, like, if you live in Canada, if you live in Brazil or whatever, right? It's not inconceivable, but it's just harder from the beginning. I think that's your point.
That's part of my point. But I mean, what do you mean by gatekeeping? If you're not referring to being allowed in the club, as in being allowed.
Oh yeah, I guess yeah. So
that is kind of what.
Yeah, my general sentiment is that like the pro community is very judgmental, and there's just sort of like there's just a decision made on whether or not you're accepted in or not, and the criteria might not always be transparent. I mean, it's like this in every social group, right? So just basically asking you if that's the reality, or is there actually kind of a meritocracy? Because like, if you do well enough in terms of results, then you will be accepted. And so in that sense, it's not really gatekeeping, because gatekeeping implies there's some level of subjectivity in terms of like who's allowed in and who's not. I mean, there's also another argument about whether in or not is even valuable, which is probably not at this point, but I think you understand.
Certainly at this point, it's not really valuable, but more, I think what I was saying is sort of that how I viewed it is that someone like Shahar was let past the gates because of the people he knew and the friends he had, easier than someone else who would, let's say, have the same level of results if that's all you're looking at, right? Mm-hmm. They've seen him play, they talk to him, they know him, they like him. Mm-hmm. versus like, let's say, I could say me, where they hadn't really seen me play that much. I had maybe better results than Shahar, but I wasn't invited into any teams. The thing is, I do think, and like the balance with that in a meritocracy is that to become one of the great Magic players, you really do need to play with other great Magic players. There's only so far that, let's say, grinding modal leagues and stuff can take you. You can get to 85% from that or something, but to get the next 10 15%, you really need to play with other people who are the greats, because the edges there are so small and you're just not going to pick them up like that. You really need someone watching you and asking why you're making this. Nowadays there's Magic coaching available all the time, which I think can kind of bridge that gap a lot. Back in the day, at least, really the best Magic players were the ones who kind of got taken under someone else's wing at some point or another. They were seen as kind of having promise and pushed up. And you do need someone to see that promise in you and kind of to be accepted by like the pro community usually meant that you had a bunch of members who were already respected in the community vouch for you, right? Whether or not, so for instance, Luis can say, yeah, this kid Shahar, he's actually really good, even though he doesn't have that many results yet. I've seen him play and he's a cool dude. I think we should work with him, or we should help him out, okay, cool, versus like this other person who has equivalent results, nobody's going to vouch for until they accumulate, 3-4 times the amount of results and they've been seen play. It says, okay, this guy's pretty good. We should like see if they want to work with us or something.
Did you feel like you were always in the second category, or did you have people vouch for you?
Well, at first I was in the second category, but then I got to the point where I was in the first category, sort of, where I was better known and I guess somewhat liked. It's hard to always when it's you yourself.
Yeah.
And relatively respected, I think. I had put up results, but enough people had seen me play. Like I had a solid reputation, I think, at least as a good player.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I mean, I know people who are good players, or at least reasonable players, who like never really got the chance to become great because they didn't have, let's say, like they weren't as likable or they weren't as known. And that was something like I tried a little bit to work on at the beginning when I was starting to become pro. As like the first few pro tours, I would just invite every Canadian Magic player who's qualified to come and test with our group. Anybody who wanted to could come. Ended up shutting it down because I understand it's like the reason some of these limits are that it's hard to test with when there's a huge skill disparity, and some personalities and stuff can be grating, right? You're when you're stuck in a house with someone for a week or two, you want people to be with, and you don't want
personality clashes and all that too.
You don't have to, and you don't have to redo all your testing because like no matter which side of the matchup it is, it's like Luis always wins against Johnny or whatever. Whether it's Johnny's playing Burn or Fairies, like
it's hard to draw conclusions from that. Yeah,
exactly. So that's why there's been that. And then kind of in more recent eras, I think there's the gatekeeping is more with like someone will tweet that they are the best Magic player in the world. Let's say, Croaky style, like, oh, I'm
number one mythic, baby.
Guys, look, I've been top 17 mythic for 3 months in a row, and the pros will come back with, that doesn't mean anything. Like, that come and prove yourself in a tournament, like come and, play with us, these stakes, like I was saying, like, these, what I call these kids, but they're whatever, college age, mid-20s at this point. I'm now
they're just younger than us, sure.
Yes, younger than me, and they're some of them have almost as much pro tour experience as I do, but it's just they're just younger, so I can call them a kid. That's my right to someone in my almost 30s now. But yeah, so they tweet, oh, we'll play anyone a vintage cube 3v3 for 100 ticks or something, and it's like that's a lot of bravado, but for some of us old timers, it's not worth getting out of bed for 100 ticks, so it's well, if you play for higher stakes, and they're like, no, we're too scared.
Well, it usually comes down to like, hey, I'm doing this thing for like 100 hours a week and you're not, therefore I am really good at doing this thing for 100 hours a week. Or there's some sort of like list discussion, because we all love that stuff, which is like, who is the greatest X of all time, or who is the greatest X of I don't know, the last 15 years that had a candy bar before they logged into arena or something. So it's like you could just break it down in so many different ways, and it's just, in a way, it's great fun, but in other ways I can see people get a little too serious about it at times, which is always a
Yeah.
tough place to be, right? Especially
Well, a
online.
lot of the problem is I think a lot of people, I talked about how I think to become great at Magic, you need a certain level of obsession and stuff. And I think again with the mental health stuff, I was for sure guilty of this. I'm better now, but I attached a lot of my self worth to how good I was at Magic, how well I was doing at Magic. It's of course incredibly unhealthy thing, but that pushed me more, and I think that's the case for a lot of people who were or are at the top. So having your accomplishments diminished, and basically is people take it as an attack. It's attack on their ego, it's attack on themselves, and that's why they can get way more involved in it than it really warrants. As someone posting like a screenshot of number one mythic, I'm the best in the world. I personally, my approach is like, look, if you want to believe that, that's fine. Like, if you're going to tweet at me, hey, I'm better than you, you suck, ha ha ha, I'm number one, that's maybe
Yeah, you come at the king, you best not miss, right? Yeah.
It's like, well, it's like, look, you can post that, and like if you believe that, like that's cool. I don't believe that, and like I think it's very easy to prove that person is probably not the best Magic player in the world in a bunch of different ways. The issue I think nowadays comes that, like, it's the problem with a lot of the world is that there's no real objective truth in so many things, like, right, where there's like in politics, the deep state not stuff, or the Trump investigation, lock her up, Hillary Clinton, whatever, Biden's emails. You can the vaccine being good or not, right? Like, certainly, we can disagree on what's actually factually true. Like, I believe that the vaccine has been scientifically proven to be useful, right? Other people think, oh no, it's has other stuff. And with the internet, you can find tons of it's a
Any position can be supported. Yeah.
Exactly. Before the internet existed, nobody was a flat earther, right? It's just obvious. You stand at the edge of the water, you look at the horizon, you can see the curve.
You also couldn't organize, like you couldn't find the other 100,000 people that
you can find a bunch of
Earth.
Now it's very few people that are that percentage of like level of idiot, right, to actually believe the Earth is flat. You have to find people from a very large area to congregate on the internet and make YouTube videos to prove that it's true, because whatever conspiracy it is. And it's kind of that's invaded the Magic world as well. And now that money in Magic is no longer from what is kind of the truth of, like, you come to a tournament, if you win or you don't win, right? Like, sure, each individual time there's a bunch of variants, but over time you get to see a picture of what the truth is, right? Mm-hmm. Over time, luck eventually rounds to zero, given enough time.
There's the whole,
now it's way more entertainment industry rather than like a proof of who's actually the best and who's right about things. So it's all about making money, and you get more eyeballs, you get more viewers watching you if you claim that you're like amazing, you're the best. And because of that, people are claiming it with at best flimsy evidence, right? And then other people refuting it, because by other people claiming it's moving the viewers over to them and away from them. Like, if someone says they're the best player of all time from Brazil because they posted number one mythic thing, I'm pretty sure that if a lot of people, everybody believes that, it's going to hurt Paulo's business, right? He's not going to get as many people to coach. He's not going to get as great writing deals, etc. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's where kind of our current issues lie, and it doesn't really affect me that much because I'm not involved in any of this ecosystem anymore. But I still have some people I care about that are. So it does bother me a little bit when like people effectively diminish those people's results in their resumes, because I think they deserve to be getting paid for their efforts.
Yes.
And I think there are more and more, there's like kind of scam artist level people in the Magic community.
I think just being respectful of history, being respectful of context is just something that's become very hard or harder to do. in this day and age in 2022. I would also argue, as someone who has thought about this a heck of a lot, I don't want to bore you with all the details that I did, like just talking to people, in private groups and things like that. Because the other thing I believe too is like when you talk in a public setting, it all goes to shit very quickly, like any topic.
Oh, yes.
Because nobody ever wants to say I'm wrong on the internet ever. Like it's just not a thing, right? I don't think anyone in history of the internet has ever admitted in a public forum like I was wrong. But I think it's also just people don't really want the truth anymore. I think people just don't really care about objectivity because life has become perceived to be more demanding, harder, which I actually refute on several levels. But I think it's just the sentiment that people have, and just doom scrolling and looking at how someone's like better or worse off than me because of Instagram or whatever crap is out there. I don't think people want the truth anymore. I think people just want entertainment. People just want to be entertained by people fighting. They want to be entertained by making lists. And people also really care about, and I'm guilty of this too, because I make content like self-branding. So, saying that I'm the best at X could be fun. It could benefit me. Like if I came out tomorrow and said, I'm the best Asian interviewer of a magic podcast that starts with humans, like, you know what I mean, right? There's degrees, but like, people create these storylines. Everyone thinks they're an athlete or a celebrity now. So it's so different from back in the day where other people have to validate you. Now it's just kind of like, I will validate myself. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, and it's good when it comes to mental health, especially to self-validate yourself. Right. But when it comes to like online stuff, like you say, people aren't really interested in truth. It's way more like just choose your own truth, right? You can kind of pick that more and more. There's simulation theory that we're all living in a simulation, right? That we're just basically in a video game. Or
that feels more plausible to me by the day, honestly.
Yeah.
Like a year ago, 2 years ago, I was like, there's no way. But now I'm just like,
Yeah, well, are you familiar with the double slit experiment in physics, for example? That like
I am not. Is that can you explain?
Okay, well, basically that particles in our universe, things behave differently when observed or not observed. So like if you shine a light through, a light can behave.
Just the act of observation makes the thing different.
So so whether if you're looking at something or if you're not looking at something, it'll behave differently.
Yeah.
So obviously, if if the world's a simulation, it would make sense that they're using more processing power in the parts that are being observed than the parts in the background.
Is this like a more advanced version of Schrodinger's cat? I don't know what it.
Yes, it's somewhat related to Schrodinger's cat.
Okay, interesting. I'll have to look that up.
Physicist. The child of physicists.
I think you are a physicist because if you can play one on the internet, that's for sure. And you can
actually, I'm the number one expert in the
You're the number one magic physicist that lives in Montreal and has a name that starts.
When you add enough of that stuff, it's probably actually true. But versus like this is number one pizza, best pizza in the world.
I do want to also ask you about something that it's actually a shame that Table for Two, your podcast with KYT, kind of discontinued. Like it looked like you guys came back in 2020 and it just stopped again because he got busy and things happened, right? But I really like the topic that you guys had about. I think it was in the last episode. It was you were talking about the content and how magic content has kind of gone down the shitter. They're just giving you a cyborg guide and like some of the stuff that's free is actually better. Like, when Lucas Esper Bertude, you said, wrote a tournament report on Reddit, it was free, but it was actually valuable. How's your views about content? Have they changed just in some way, like in the last 2 or 3 years based on what you.
So I don't think my views have really changed since I talked about that on Table for Two with KYT. One of the fun things of that podcast is that like I can still tell people to go and listen to it because I think mostly it's timeless. Magic as a magic podcast goes, it's more about general principles and ideas of things rather than like specific decks, which is again one of my issues in some ways about content now. That like I obviously have a biased perspective because back in the day when I was consuming a ton of content, it was something way more valuable to me than nowadays. Like I know most of the stuff that people are going to try and teach, but people aren't even trying. It seems to me that people aren't really trying to teach that stuff anymore. That when I was like an up and coming Magic player, I learned a huge amount. Like the majority of what I learned about Magic was from reading articles, and I guess to a lesser extent watching videos. It was almost all reading articles. Videos were less of a thing. I think it was like more coverage of Pro Tour top eights, which is all they had back then. But articles were huge. Like Mike Flores articles were valuable to me, and probably the most valuable were PV articles, who I think is the, some people argue is the GOAT Magic player. That one I'll pass on that discussion. But in terms of the GOAT Magic article writer, I think that for me at least, he's earned that because he understands these concepts very well because he is a top level player and he's really good at articulating it and laying it out. And so you can learn so much. You have to read and then you have to actually try and put that stuff into practice. That's, like we talked about with mental health stuff, right? There's that gap. So you have to, I recommend reading articles and then maybe playing some Magic or doing whatever the thing is that discussed in the article right after it. But you can learn so much with that. And nowadays, yeah, it's just people don't want that. I think in content, not just Magic content, but worldwide, has just realized what makes the most money, right? And the answer is clickbait crap. Just like what games make the most money, gotcha games and all these the freemium models where it's free to enter. 99% of people pay nothing, and then 1% of people pay $1,000 a day, and that makes you way more money than just selling a game for $80 to everybody, right? It's the same thing. With content in Magic, it's basically there's one point where it was actual clickbait, and now I think we've gone a little bit past that, but it's now almost all just people selling sideboard guides, or now I guess I don't even look at the content anymore because I figured it's just Commander stuff 90% of the time, which is competitive Magic is kind of on the down low, but it's
do you have any thoughts?
You're being spoon-fed things rather than learning to cook.
Well, there's two things I want to explore here because, one thing you talked about with KYT was also just because even back in 2020, Patreon was a thing already. So to me, at least, and I could be wrong, it feels like a lot of the good content is now paywalled. It's like you want to get a good Grixis Death Shadow guide, you have to pay this person $20 a month or $5 a month so you can get that. If you want a really good black-red mid-range deck, you join Derek's Misplaced Ginger's Patreon and he'll give that to you. So it feels like things have evolved more in that direction where it's just there's an understanding that people who want the actual strategic content. Now you can make an argument as to whether those guides are good or not, but just put that aside for a second. There's sort of understanding now. It's just now to access these things, you don't go on a site anymore. A central site, you go and click this button to give this person $5, you get that. You give this person $10, you get that. So I guess the question is how do you feel about that? Is that filling the void that young Alex would have was really into when you were reading articles and trying to get better as a Magic player?
Well, no, that's the thing. It's the content they're producing is not the kind of content that young Alex would like. I mean, again, it's the content that's useful if your goal is to perform as best you possibly can at this one upcoming tournament this weekend.
With deck X for this weekend, right? And that's it.
You have a tournament this weekend and you want to do as well as you can possibly in it. And you have half an hour to study up or whatever. These are the best resources you have for sure. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to, become a better Magic player, though, these are not good resources. Mm-hmm. And it's, again, with the clickbaity stuff, it's so much that our attention spans and our, delayed gratification mechanisms and stuff, we're not good at that stuff anymore. You watch an old movie versus a modern movie, and the new movies are just so much faster paced because we can't sit there and wait for things to build up after a while.
That's also. I feel like it's also a change for me. I don't know if you did you watch the new Batman movie? There was the one with the Batman that came out this year.
No, I sadly haven't. But it's on my list. I want to watch it. But you can.
I'm not going to spoil anything. I'll tell you, I really enjoy this movie as a diehard Batman fan. I really enjoy this movie. But even I, a man who is a self-admitted boomer and in my 40s, I cannot help. The moment I booted up the movie on my streaming service, I was like, why is this movie over 2 hours? This is a 2 hour and 20-minute movie. I ended up watching the movie over like 3 sittings, which is the beauty of like watching it at home, right? But even I, someone who lived through the 90s, and the 90s are my favorite period in time, full stop. I just can't understand why a movie is now over 90 minutes. And it's just like I fear that I have been damaged by the conditions surrounding me to have a shorter attention span. So I wonder about that too.
Me too, for sure. Like, okay, first of all, I watch movies way less than shows now. Partly, I think that shows often are better quality, they more original content rather than movies, which tend
all the good stuff went into shows now. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, and for show, you don't need as long an attention span or a period of time. But even with that, though, my attention span, my like need for constant stimulation is to the point that I'm like always on my phone when I'm even when I'm watching something. It's like the big screen and then the little screen where I'm also doing something.
Yeah.
And I just imagine when I was a kid, right? I would go to the bathroom, and guess what I would do there when I had to take a crap? I would just take a crap. Now it's like, oh, better pull out my Sudoku.
Pull up Twitter or whatever it is.
Or what's happening on Twitter, or like, or like waiting in a line or going on the bus. Like I would just like look out, see what people are doing.
I can't do nothing now. I have to like scroll through something.
I can't do nothing. Yeah, like, and it's got even the point that like for me, I told you I don't listen to that many podcasts, but I do listen to podcasts at one time. It's when I'm going to sleep, because I can't. Even then, I still have to have something as I'm going to sleep.
Some stimulation, right?
Yeah. So and so many other things, and I think it's that trickles down in a variety of recent things. Like people don't want to spend their time honing a skill that's going to be beneficial to them in like the next 2 years or something, right? It'll maybe only really pay off reading a PV article in like a year, because at that point you'll finally internalize it and have gotten enough benefit out of it, versus reading a sideboard guide for the tournament this weekend gives you your win percentage goes up 5% or whatever, right? That's a big boost. You get it this weekend.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on the PV thing. I love his articles. I think he's one of the goats of content, because he actually knows how to write for an audience, which is very unlike. I would argue that someone like Flores or like Zvi, like they don't write as well for an audience. They're just sort of like brilliant minds, but they can't get you to internalize what's in their mind. Whereas Paulo really understands how to write so that you can digest it. Like, I think that's the brilliance of Paulo. He's not just a brilliant
and the fact
mind,
that it's not his first language too. He's writing in his second.
Yeah, and he's had a lot of practice. Like, you can tell he really worked at it. Like he used to do these things where he would ask people for like, what should I write about? I always respected that, even though I didn't participate that much, right? He would ask people like, what should I write about? And he would actually give honest feedback. Like, someone would say, you should write about X. And he's like, I don't think enough people care about X. And like, I love that he used to put himself out there. And that's kind of lost, but that's another rant. The second question I had about content for you was, I also see that Magic's become, I hope you agree, like Magic's become more of a game engine nowadays, right? Because there's Commander and there's like different ways to play. And so I think there's also a thing that's happened, which is people have just fully gone into a lane where it's just about budget Magic, just about casual content. So, which I think is also good, because it's more options. And in some ways they're very clear about what they're going for. They're not trying to give you top level strategy content. They're just like having fun playing Magic in a stream, and they want you to enjoy that as well, or maybe follow the personality. So I know, as someone who's a very high level player, like, do you have any thoughts about that? Because I think that has developed greatly even the last like 2-3 years. There's people that are just like, their goal is never going to be like make the PT, right?
Yeah. Well, my thoughts on that, people might be surprised, but I think it's great. I think it's awesome to have all this casual content, Commander content. Like, I love that people can enjoy the game in a variety of different ways. What I think is like sad is that it just seems like at least from Wizards' part, not from the content creators' part, right? But from the support is just going all into that stuff, and there's like the competitive side of the game is just being ignored. You know, that even though like technically for Commander and let's say 1v1 Magic, you know, the card engine, right, is the same. It's just the cards you make for either thing are just so different. The games are so different, right? That it does hurt the, you know, the 1v1 side when the cards are made. But I think content of all kinds, like I think if you want to go out there and make content, you should go and do it, and you should do it about the stuff that makes you passionate, right? Like whether, you know, it's in your case like interviewing people and understanding the people around the game, or someone else loves, you know, wacky combos, or someone else loves making budget decks, or somebody else loves playing Commander. Just go then and do it. Like the most fun I think I had making content, besides, you know, I've had fun hanging with KYT, just talking about, you know, the stuff that I was passionate about, and stuff we both found interesting, even though we're on the way out of like playing Magic, right? Or the content I made with Jacob Wilson, like the various troll videos and stuff, where it's just like pure fun and like just trying to do something wacky, like while still trying to win. You know, that I find that fun. Like I like doing weird things and still winning. You know, I've always had.
Well, I love that. So just to explain people that may not have seen it, like the Legacy Troll Delver series you did with Jacob Wilson, which is like you guys just basically played this insane sideboard. So the game ones look fine, but then you guys would just be like cracking up as you were like figuring out, should I side in Tybalt or not? And I think there's a takeaway there, which is like, when you do that kind of content, I could tell that you guys really enjoy doing the content in the moment.
Exactly,
like it was
yeah.
not a performance because you felt like there was an obligation to deliver to somebody. It was not like, oh man, I'm getting paid every week. I got to write this article. I have to write something. So let me write about how to sideboard in this deck. Like that was an expression of pure joy. Like you there's nobody forcing you to do that.
Like,
I
was
you just
that
thought it was fun
because
of Frank or whatever,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Like as it turned out, CFB with the content was for, like, gave me some credit or something for my part in that, but I wasn't expecting either ways, you know. And it was cool, and we did, and partly from the success and how much fun we had doing that, we did a bunch of other ones. I think the most I think this point is when we did a modern deck of was Merfolk, a mono blue Merfolk deck, splashing red for Boil, which is destroy all islands. We had various ways like spreading seas and stuff to turn your opponent's islands into islands, and we played like no ourselves, all like random dual lands.
Well, here's like two of the spikiest men on the planet, like just playing this Johnny deck and just trying to make it work. And I think there's also an extra level of entertainment, which is like you're trying to talk about this deck's game plan seriously, right?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, we're some of the stuff we're joking around. We know we're joking, but when we're playing the games, we have the spike mindset. Look, this is the deck. These are the tools we have. Let's figure out the way.
This is the card you're dealt because you put Commandeer in your Legacy Delver sideboard.
Yeah. We have a Boil in our hand. How are we going to maximize casting this Boil to destroy as many of their lands as we can, or whatever? No, and like, so that's fun for us because we're still solving the puzzle. We're still trying to win, right? And I think watching it can first of all get the enjoyment, the entertainment value of like the casual wackiness of it, but also they can learn something from hearing our thought processes, talking to each other about, you know, figuring out what line to take, because it's like it's not going to be practical for them next weekend when they're playing their Death Shadow deck in the top 8 or whatever, but they learn like the way we think, the way to approach decisions, and I think that's hugely valuable. Like when I coach Magic students, which is not very often, because I charge a lot because I only want people who really want to learn. And it's I focus on trying to teach people like the way to structure their thought processes about turns, about plays, about, you know, game plans. Because so often people, you know, because we all start playing Magic as a game, right, as something to do for fun, there's still a lot of those habits built there, even when you kind of start playing it more competitively, that you just autopilot to making plays because those are the plays you've always made without actually thinking about it, the active thinking.
Do you find that, I know you say you don't get a ton of clientele, but like the clients that you do get for coaching, do you are they into that stuff, or are they expecting you to give them the cyborg guide because you're trying to teach them how to fish?
No, they're not expecting the sideboard guide. I mean, I'm pretty. I think
they
I'm
know
pretty
what you're about, right? So they're not coming
what
to
I'm about, and so yeah, and I think both my students and I have been pretty happy with things. I've I enjoy it. I like talking about magic, and especially that stuff in magic, and teaching it. In some ways, in my like team experience in tournaments, like that was often my role to like go around. I would try and like help my team get better at magic, because that was kind of where my skill lied, where other people were better at, let's say, the deck selection side of things, or tuning a deck or whatever.
Like asking the right questions, maybe.
Yeah, asking the right questions, like, and trying to being like, look, so okay, so why did you make that play? Like, you could also be like, that play's terrible, but instead it's way more interesting to find out why they made that terrible play. The thought process behind it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a reason, and sometimes the reason makes sense, and then like okay, it's like, but a lot of the time there's no reason to it at all. Yeah. It's just like, I didn't even think about it. I just
or it makes sense in their reality. So maybe going back to some previous topics, it's like you're trying to give them the tools to process their reality differently and such. Right?
All right, I wouldn't quite go that deep. I might have to raise.
We're trying to promote your new book, getting next level magic, the Alex Hayne way or whatever. You could write it.
I am doing some writing, but not magic related. I'm doing my hand at writing some fiction. That's my latest project, to see if I enjoy that.
Oh, what's the? Can you spoil us? Like, is it what sort of genre is it?
Well, I'm mainly interested in sci-fi fantasy stuff. My current project is more on the sci-fi style side of things, some time travel related stuff.
Right on. So we got
too much, but
got beginning of a new career. Yeah. So
well, we'll see. I at least I have as like a bucket list goal to at least write one novel in my lifetime. Like I love reading, and I've read a ton of books. I think one of my fun facts in MPL thing was I read almost 3,000 books or something. I think I've now passed over the 3,000 mark.
What's a recent book you've read that you've really enjoyed?
I liked Jemison. She wrote her trilogy, the Broken Earth trilogy. First one is the 5th season. I like that a lot. I read all the Wheel of Time not that long ago, and I like them, but they're not. I don't know if it's fully worth it to go through all the whole thing.
How many books are in the Wheel of Time? Never tried.
14. There's 14 of them, and they're all 1,000 pages or something.
That is incredible. So I'll tell you, I've been trying to read Brandon Sanderson, and I'm just getting stuck like 15% into the book, and it's just the books are just too long.
Which one of his are you reading?
I'm trying to read his first novel. It's called Elantris, I think.
Elantris, yeah. Okay.
Some people have told me it's not his best work, but I wanted something from him that I could read as one novel and not be like 1 and 3, because I think I was trying to read Mistborn or something else, and I really enjoyed the first book, but I'm still stuck in the first book because it's just taking so freaking long. I felt like I've already gone through 3 Lord of the Rings trilogies and in 20% of the book, and the book still has 80% to go. So it's just
yeah. I think I like Mistborn more than Elantris, but I think you could just read Mistborn and not read the second or third one. I'm sure that it was. I don't know if it was made originally to be a trilogy or not, but
I might have gotten it wrong. I don't know if it's Mistborn, but it's one of the ones that's like the first of a trilogy from Sanderson.
Yeah, it is a trilogy. Though the Mistborn is
Stormlight. I think Stormlight.
Oh, the Stormlight Archive.
Yeah, I think I'm on the first.
That one's okay. Yeah, that one's really long. Yeah, Mistborn.
That's massive.
Yeah, that one's massive. I've read all of those as well.
It's good, but I also have this not bad habit, but I just have a habit of like just reading multiple books at once. So I'll try to go back.
I have that habit too. Don't worry.
And sometimes it's like a video game. Like you forget the controls. Like who are these characters? Like because it's been a month since I read this book, so it's like I don't remember who they are. So I feel like I have to read that again from the beginning. And Do you have any tips to overcome that? Because like I think this is my attention span problem. Like I can't get through, like I can barely get through 2 hours of the Batman movie, let alone a Sanderson.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I think maybe getting on a regular reading schedule and just trying to work on one book until you're done. Or if you're going to pause it, write yourself a brief synopsis of where you're at, something like that.
I like that.
At least I don't struggle as much being like partway through a bunch of fiction books. For me, like I have 5 nonfiction books that I'm all like, somewhere in the 30 to 50% range through a bunch of, and for that it's a lot slower for me. For fiction, I almost always read like it's just pure enjoyment, right? I just read it, I get it kind of into the story. I basically leave this world behind. I'm pretty good at going into the world of my own mind.
Nice.
But with fiction, I kind of every couple of pages read something, and then I often have to internalize it or think about it way more, because how am I going to put in practice? Let's say, reading a book on stoicism, for example, or there's various other things of like there's all the Malcolm Gladwell stuff, or various things of books on writing. I'm halfway through like 3 different ones. Stephen King's one. There's other ones.
Stephen King's one is the best. Yeah.
Well, the first part where he's talking about his own life and stuff, that part I breezed through, super easy.
Oh, really? That's fascinating too. But a different strokes for different folks. Yeah.
But then the part where he's talking about writing.
Oh, I see. So you enjoyed his biography part, and now it's like,
yeah.
He's like, let me now tell you how to write
too.
Yeah.
I enjoy the part about writing too, but every time I try and practice every time I read like something, it's like, you should do this. I'm gonna go and put it into practice. Kind of like I recommend for people to do if they're like reading PV articles, to go and try and put into practice the thing you're reading, because otherwise it's just going to remain knowledge and not actually go into practical sense.
Oh, totally. I think I'm the opposite of you. I would just breeze through nonfiction books, and I do take notes, but for fiction books, I don't take notes, and it takes me forever to get through a Brandon Sanderson novel, and I think there's something wrong with me. I just have to fix my.
I don't
wiring.
think so, but again, different strokes, different folks. Mike Siggers, who you mentioned, I think he said that he's read 7 books in his lifetime or something. So it's different people. Like he's not a stupid guy. Jacob Wilson, also very bright. I don't think he's much of a reader. Different people have different things that they like. So for me, it's especially science fiction, fantasy novels. Like for me, like in Hot Knife Through Butter, the Harry Potter books back in the day, was a little bit of a gatekeeper, not gatekeep, but gateway draw. Yeah. Reading, but I was already reading before that. I was always, I guess from age 6 onwards, I would often have my nose in a book.
Yeah. Have you ever gone into I'm just looking at my bookshelf now, Murakami's novels?
I read some of his stuff. Yeah, I like it, but I think I have one Murakami book that I have just barely started or something, but haven't, like, I'm 3 pages in, but then didn't get into, and I have to find where it is because I probably packed it for some trip or another. And then I've on magic trips, I've been bad at reading, partly because I'm often sharing a room with someone else, and I don't like keeping the lights are not set up often for reading and not keeping someone else awake.
Yeah.
But also I'm focused on doing magic stuff. So for that, all those trips, I would often not be good at reading.
I was the weird guy 2 weekends ago because I went to an RCQ or whatever the heck it's called now. I was just like reading an actual physical book between rounds because I couldn't be bothered to actually watch other people play Magic. I'm just like, I'm here to try to do well, and I don't give a shit about anything else. And I was just reading a book on economics between rounds of Magic, and it felt tournament sucked. Like I think I went 0-3 drop. I actually didn't drop after 0-2 because I was like, oh, I want to play this out, and then I realized I wasn't winning any matches, and the spike part of my brain just activated. Is like, get the fuck out of here, and James, and I just got out of there. It's just like RCQs are just tempting because they're like, I'm in Shanghai, like every weekend there's some RCQ, so it's like you could get to them fairly easily. So whatever, I'll try. Yeah,
it's fun. I mean, for me, they talk. There's the Magic, and then there's the Gathering. And at this point, I'm way more into the Gathering than into the Magic. Whereas earlier at the beginning of when I started playing, it was all the Magic. Now it's all the Gathering, and then the big middle, it was like they kind of met in the middle.
Yeah.
I wonder if everybody kind of goes on that trajectory in some ways.
Oh, I feel that so bad. Like I felt really crappy playing at RCQ because I didn't really know anybody who was going. I think the next one I'm going, I actually have a friend who will be going together, and that will be a lot more fun. And honestly, I rather enjoy doing this kind of podcast than actually playing Magic at this point in my life. So we all have to find our ways, right? Okay, Alex, I'll leave you one last question. I'm sorry this interview has gone super long, but you've been like super gracious with answering everything. The last question I have for you is, if you were running Wizards, what change would you make in the short term for Magic and in the long term for Magic? And you can caveat your answer however you want, or just give me your answer.
Yeah, so
it's fine.
So it's interesting. I mean, a lot of that would come to basically my view on companies and corporations, because the way things are set up right now, it's like the only person that corporations are really they're withholding to their stockholders, right? And that's it. It's like, if you make the stock price go up, if you can make the company more profit, then you're successful. That's the only thing that matters.
Yep.
That's not my personal view. Like, even as an investor, I like to invest in companies that I think do more than that. And I think that it would be better for the world if we had more companies were more viewed, not only their shareholders, but also their employees and their customers and their community as part of,
like a more well-rounded consideration as opposed to just shareholders.
Yes. Yeah. So in terms of, let's say, if you're viewing things from a shareholder perspective, right? Like, I think the short-term stuff that Wizards is doing is really good. I think they're currently raking in the money. But you do have to wonder, like, are they, skinning the sheep rather than shearing it, right? At some point, people might decide that this is too expensive. They might not get the influx of new players because people look at this as way too expensive a hobby, or with, it's way too like ingrown and it's not that accessible, right? So I can see those potential dangers. Like, the way I would try and approach things, I would, again, I like, there's the classic thing of people working at Wizards, right, are not being paid as much as they would be elsewhere because they come in because they love the game. Now, I think they have improved that in recent years. I think they've made salaries a bit more competitive, but I would still like them to maybe even, push it up a bit more, treat their employees as not have people who are actually.
Now I am remembering one of the tweets you fired off this year, which was really funny, but I'll avoid repeating it here. Please go on with your answer.
All right. And then, and I think that the community around it matters too. Like, there are some stuff that, borders on predatory. Obviously, people are all opting in, but Magic is addictive, and some people, can't stop themselves, and prices ratcheting up. So yeah, from my perspective, what I would do in the short term, I do somewhat think that having a pro level thing for Magic is ultimately beneficial, in that over time you can at least get some of the respect that something like chess does, right? That parents are going to encourage their kids to go and do it. Teachers will, like, encourage it as well, because it's seen as an intellectual pursuit. It's, just like, or maybe even like a sport. It's something that, is a worthwhile thing to be spending your time on. And I think if you can get that into the popular zeitgeist, right, then I think you manage to accumulate more players from a different angle. And I don't think it costs you that much money, but I'm not an expert in all that stuff. I don't know all the interior finances. And other things, I mean, I think the Commander stuff is definitely good. Clearly people love having all these promos and new Commander sets and things. They do seem to be printing a lot of sets that might cause some fatigue, but I don't have the numbers on that, and I'm going to assume that they're doing reasonable work with that. So
I actually think I could be wrong, but I remember one of your takes was they sucked the soul out of Commander by just corporatizing it and just making Commander products. Is the moment it's sort of like the perception thing, like once you touch it, it no longer becomes the thing, or once you focus in on it, it no longer becomes
exactly. Yeah, that I mean, I tweeted something along that line, that basically that like even I found Commander interesting. It's not really my cup of tea, though. When I started playing Magic, it was basically all multiplayer that I would play. Actually, with at my college, it was just we'd be in the lounge and it was playing
free for all, but it wasn't Commander.
Free for all, it wasn't Commander, right? It was everybody just had a deck, and it was whatever. I remember one guy brought his deck and it had like 7 copies of Soul Ring in it. Because, level of like, and of course,
Soul Ring for
nowadays my mind's like 7 copies of Soul Rings. What the hell? Like what broken thing is he doing? And it was like casting like Crash of Worms or something, and then flashing it back to just 6/6, something super casual.
Fortunately, I never ran into the person with like the 40 lightning bolts. There's always a guy like that.
Yeah, well, there wasn't in our group, but also in a multiplayer group, that guy is just, he kill one person, right? But then just
and then all just go. You'd all
right?
just go.
This is not fun.
Yeah,
you had to have some kind of recurring thing, some board presence, right? Or card advantage, or there's I had a lot of fun times in the early days in like Magic Club.
But I guess we're just talking about how. Like,
but yes, but anyways,
there's the grassrootsness of Commander is basically lost because it's become this thing that's fed through a corporate machine, and they're specifically designing for Commander, and as opposed to in the past where it's like, oh cool, this card from Mirage can now be played in Commander and I can fish it out of the bin, right?
Yeah, all the Commander used to be like the cool rejects of all the previous rejects of competitive Magic or whatever. Now like now Amazing Ristic Study.
Now they're the rock stars, and whatever. It's
all these things, 7 mana sorceries are now supreme.
Yes.
Put it in random creature, Primeval Titan's so good that it has to be banned, right? Let alone other things. It was kind of neat. And then now it feels like it's just designed by wizards, right? They're just making these sets, and it's more and more becoming about the Commander cards specifically, rather than just cards designed for Commander, that rather than cards that happen to be like cool Timmy cards or cool Johnny cards, right?
Yeah, like True Name Nemesis.
Yeah, like that. Like, why is that a Commander card? That all the card really. I don't know. I mean, I don't play that much Commander, but it just doesn't seem like a good Commander card. First of all, you have to choose an opponent, so everybody else can kill your thing with whatever. It dies mass removal, and it's just a 3/1 to attack with. Like, it's boring, right? But you play Legacy, and it was like it ruined my day in many a Legacy game or whatever vintage cube game. It's just True Name Nemesis. Yeah. Oh, GTA. Yeah. Whipped it. Okay. This sucks. I don't get to do anything. I'm just dead. Like, but I can't imagine them playing in a Commander game, or like Flusterstorm was the Commander card. Like,
and then there was cards that are just bad for every format, Commander and Eternal, like Hull.
Well, those cards
nobody
at least
has fun
those
with
cards
that
are
card
strong in Eternal, right? But
yeah.
But they made some cool things, like if the fact that there were a bunch of color combinations, there weren't many legends available for, was somewhat interesting, that you had to make but now you have different decisions to make. You have like too many choices of what colors you want to do.
Now you have a gazillion Commanders, so it's you have all the choice in the world.
But it feels like now they're just like pointing you really in a direction, because this Commander removes counters to make Saproling tokens or whatever, and you can sack Saproling counter tokens to make counters.
Kind of builds the deck.
It's gonna be a token based deck, whatever. This other one like sacrifices artifacts to find enchantments or something. Well, what do you think's going to be in this deck? Like, it's like all pre-constructed for you, and takes away the creativity of it. Like, love Magic that I could do both my analytical side of like min-maxing individual plays to do, but deck building, there's so much creativity, there's all these cards, and it's just like you have all this puzzle space and just make what you want. And now it just feels like in Commander and other formats like Modern too, that they've just taken this organic thing that just kind of grew up and was beautiful, and they're like, oh, this rose will look even better with all these cool, like flashy things on top. And we'll sell them to people for $100 a pop.
Were you at PT Philly? You were, right? Because that in 2011, I think it was. That was the first modern event. And I was, oh yeah, you were interviewed by Dom Harvey and Ari Lax for this retrospective article that they did, I think, last year. And I actually read that, and I was like, wow, they totally sucked all the soul out of modern, I guess, because now it's just modern Horizons block constructed.
Yeah, and I've heard so many people say that, and I've looked at the decks, and it's so much like if you all my friends and I, and a lot of us didn't play.
By the way, I play modern, but I only started playing modern after MH2, so I have no idea what it was like before. So it's fascinating for me to read these things about how it was actually organic 10 years ago, and you could actually run like preordained and splinter twin, which is insane to me. Why not everyone just did? Why didn't everyone just do that? But anyways, yeah.
Well, like, don't get me wrong, I've never really been a fan of modern as a format. I never really liked it for whatever reason. I think partly just because it's from the era of Magic where the threats were all super strong and the answers were not necessarily that strong.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like Legacy, you have access to both the great threats and the great answers, and it kind of creates a bit more of a balance. Or it's felt until I haven't played again Legacy for a while, and yeah, my friends and I didn't play any modern since pre-pandemic, and now suddenly it's like, yeah, none of your cards or your decks are any good. You can't upgrade them or whatever. It's just complete garbage. Just throw them out, buy a bunch of Modern Horizons cards.
Yes,
and there's 4-color garbage pile or whatever now, or you can play. I don't know, blue, red, mythic rares, or like those. Those are your choices. So there used to be like combo decks and aggro decks and mid-range decks and other types of control decks and ramp decks and all these things, and it was just from cards they printed that weren't designed to be played in modern. And sure, there were problems with the format, but a lot of people loved it, and the original idea was that people could take their old standard decks and like upgrade them and keep playing with them, right?
Because extended wasn't quite meeting that, right? Or it was becoming Cobblade V2 or whatever. And don't get me wrong, like I'm fully aware that as Magic players, we have this like grass is greener on the other side syndrome all the time. Like we always look at things with extreme nostalgia, but it was actually very problematic too. Like, because for a very long time, modern, I would argue, was very much like two ships passing the night, and you just did your thing, they did their thing, or I have Stony Silence, so you're dead, or I don't have Stony Silence, so I'm dead. So it's like it's kind of goes to what you're saying.
Still a bit of that now, though, isn't there? Like if someone's
most definitely, it's just become very like agenda driven, where it's just like you either have an answer for Regavan, like it's just sorry, there's just new axes of pillars that to build around, but it's fundamentally still just like handed to you, like here are the pillars of the format, can you deal with it? No, you're dead. Can you deal with it? Okay, then you have a chance. It's in some ways, I don't know, maybe because you're so much better at understanding that than I am. Like, was there a golden age of constructed Magic where that would be like in your top all time, where it didn't feel like that? Because you just said you don't like modern for these reasons, so therefore there must be some formats or certain periods of Magic where it really felt good in different ways.
Yeah, there were. I mean, I've enjoyed different formats, but I think for me at least, when I started playing, felt like in terms of like deck choice and deck creation was like original Ravnica Kamigawa, and then following that Ravnica Time Spiral. But I think Ravnica Kamigawa was really cool and interesting. There was a whole bunch of different decks all the time, and I wonder, how much of that is that the like age of internet tuning and playing all these games online, right? Hadn't gotten everything like fine-tuned to the level it is now. But a lot of these decks were just not good enough, but we just didn't really know.
Yeah.
But it felt like all the decks were like kind of all had like weaknesses and strengths, and you could come up with a brew, and like your unknown deck could come and can actually compete, and that was kind of neat. And it drove certainly a love of Magic and a love of deck building to me, and kind of I've gone onwards and worked on making a bunch of different decks and stuff. sometimes, there's been formats where there has been broken decks, right? Sometimes that they've done sort of on purpose, sometimes not, depending on. I mean, something like Hogak, right? Like they designed Horizons, so they made this card specifically with modern in mind. That to me is just like, they clearly screwed up, right?
It's very egregious because it's kind of like that meme. You had one job, like you have to design card for modern, and that's all you have to do.
Yeah. Whereas I'm more forgiving of like Eldrazi, where like, look, they were not designing this for modern. They were designing these as standard cards, and just happened like they probably just didn't test how good they were with Ivuga and Eldrazi Temple, in because they weren't testing modern at the time. And to be honest, most of the competitors of the first Pro Tour also didn't test them with that stuff.
That's right. It was a breakout deck. Yeah.
Yeah. The deck was broken, but that's like a more of a fun broken, because it's like the Hogak is like, look, this card can only be used in this way, and we specifically designed it to be used in this way. So and it's obviously a very powerful card. People put a deck together. Okay, this deck's broken. I don't know what they did,
Yeah.
But like, the Eldrazi thing, look, they didn't have the resources. They weren't testing this for that. It just happens that this works with these older cards, and like a lot of people for the tournament didn't test it or figure out the special sauce or whatever. There's even more fun things where it's just really random stuff, like the original Amulet Titan deck. Like, that's super cool. I think the fact that somebody is just like, oh yeah, we should like wrap out a Primeval Titan with these bounce lands and Amulet of Vigor, and so and Summer Bloom, because you can play a bunch of lands, and like that's like for me, I take that as like artwork. It's
creativity, right? Yeah, unintended.
It's just a beautiful masterpiece. It's somebody like, I'm sure a whole bunch of people's hands, over the course of the evolution of that. But none of these cards were ever intended to work with each other, right? It's just it happens that like they're all printed from these different eras, and they just all go together in this one thing, organic, because it wasn't just on a plate. Whereas now it's like, oh, guess what? There's like the new stuff is like, there's Urza's Saga card, and there's Dryad plus Valakut or whatever. Those are the new things that the Amulet deck does, right? Because this deck already exists, so we're going to design these cards for it.
Yeah, the intentions matter. There's a whole thing about people can feel the artifice of something that's being engineered for, like just drop shipped into a format, right? Which is like very obvious with some of the newer designs, but yeah, I mean, I guess in the end we're just old men yelling at clouds, but yeah, I love it.
Well, I'm okay with it. I mean, yeah, but things again with modern stuff, right? The original idea was your standard cards just aren't going to be obsolete anymore. You can still keep using them. Your old standard deck that you love or whatever, you can play it now in modern or whatever, right? But
now it's your modern cards from 6 months ago.
That doesn't make where there's money, because you're not buying new cards if you're using your old cards. But right. The whole point was to not have to spend more money for yourself, right? You could use the same cards.
So that is an interesting observation, actually, Alex, because it supposes that any non-standard format is ultimately going to go to hell, because the intentionality behind making the format is never going to reconcile with the corporate agenda, right?
Yeah, and I think I pretty much agree with that. That's why they kind of end up having to ban things. And you look at Legacy, like from what I hear, it has some problems now, and the fact that there's all these cards on the reserve list adds to difficulties of people playing in paper, right?
Yeah,
the dual lands. I've been around for long enough for that to be like the same as Apple stock or Bitcoin or whatever. It's just like it all in, right?
Yeah,
I haven't quite been around long enough to be able to buy Black Lotuses for $5 or whatever, but dual lands for $50 or $100 or something. I could have done that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you had to have taken that Bitcoin payment, unfortunately, but we missed the boat on that.
Yeah, I should have. I haven't calculated if I took every payment that I was allowed to on their service via Bitcoin.
Right. Hey man, Alex, it was great talking to you. I'm so sorry to keep you up so late. I know it's getting pretty late over there in Canada.
Not quite midnight.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. And do you have any like shout outs or plugs, or like where can people find you on social?
Well, first I'll say thanks for having me, James. And yeah, I'll say for plugs, you can find me at INSAYNE, Hayne, HAYNE. So insane Hayne, but remember there's an extra Y in there. On Twitter. That's so you can, my DMs are open if you have something you want to talk to me about. But you can always tweet at me. That's the best way. I'll give a shout out, of course, to my boys KYT for the Canadian content master who kind of brought the country together. Pascal, kind of the first Magic player I encountered who really, I'm like, this guy's good, I locally played with. And shout out to kind of the next level and a teammate who surprised me with how good he was, Mike Segrist, who also went great things. And he's actually playing in Worlds this year. I might, I'm thinking I'm very likely to show up for whatever the Magic 30 celebration in Vegas, at least for just the last day. I'm not going to play any events, I think. But maybe I'll do some team drafts or something. But I just want to go cheer on my buddy, and I'll be in the neighborhood or whatever a little bit around then. So should be cool. But I also plan to play. I'm probably going to play both Canadian, I don't know what they're called, regional events, the one in Toronto and the one in Calgary later this year. I booked my flight to Calgary for $140 round trip, which is pretty insane. So
seems a lot more reasonable than going to Vegas for Magic 30, though, I'll have to say. Yeah.
Well, that is, again, it's more just like to see friends. My good friend Tom Martell as well. Shout out to him. Who lives in Vegas, and Siggy's playing Worlds. Hopefully he'll be the world champion. So that would be cool.
Nice.
And also for the last, when they had the CFB tournament that wasn't a Grand Prix, it was basically a Grand Prix, modern limited ones like last year. I went, and I also didn't play. I just hung out, and it's fun to see and to walk around. I played a local event recently, and I got the feeling of what it was like, and both the good and the bad. And some bad parts of it are all the more nostalgic.
What was bad about it?
Well, just you're in a relatively small space. People with not necessarily the best hygiene.
Yes.
You get mad screwed or whatever. Like
assault. Nice. My own personal problem, having just learned Magic Online the last 3 years, like during COVID, is I just don't like the analog stuff anymore. Like shuffling decks it takes a lot of time now, and waiting between rounds takes a lot of time, and I'm just an impatient motherfucker now. I can't watch a movie over 2 hours, and I can't play physical Magic tournaments without having to do something else for a while. So
yeah, I was there for like 3 rounds. It was a team tournament, so that was the reason I was playing. One of my friends yanked me in, and yeah, and team tournaments are my favorite. Because you always get the gathering. You always have 2 friends with you at least, right?
That's fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we only played 3 rounds when we were 1-2 and dropped and bounced. So that was about 3 hours about my attention span right nowadays.
That's a good mark.
Doing like 10 rounds or something.
It is ultimately about the gathering. Definitely is about the gathering. I have to reflect on this conversation and figure out my own relationship with Magic as well. But enough about me, Alex. It's been great talking to you, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks. And yeah, hopefully maybe I'll see you sometime in Canada. Maybe if you come Vancouver event, possibly. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm a West Coast guy, but I hope I can make the trip later this year. That's my fingers crossed plan for
all
now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it was great chatting with you. Thanks for having me.